men and women in uniform all around the world fighting the good fight for us. Without them, there is no me, there is no you, there is no us, and you can't hear me right now. Think about that. Happy birthday to Sam Trammell. That's right, 45 years old today. Sam plays Sam on the show True Blood. And I said to Sam a few years ago, I said, you've got a hit show. Last year, nobody knew who you were. Now, today, what's it like? He's like, man, I can't even walk down the street. I love it. Happy birthday, Sam. 45 years old. And our dead guy birthday today is W.C. Fields, who would have been like 300 years old. He was born in 1880. Let's get this show cracking. We've got a great one lined up tonight. Always the best and the brightest, the most cosmopolitan thinkers out there. Tonight is one of those shows. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. Everything is Fade to Black, at J Church Radio, Jimmy Church, Fade to Black, Church Radio, whatever. Go find it, like it, follow it, subscribe. You know what to do. All the links are there over at artbell.com and the Dark Matter Radio Network, and, of course, jimmychurchradio.com. Tonight we'll have open lines in the third segment. If our guest, Dr. Greer, allows us to, maybe we'll continue. The call-in number, as always, is 323-825-5045. The phones have been lit up all evening. Get in line. We'll be taking your calls later on tonight. You can always email throughout the show. The producers here get me the best emails. If you have a great question that can get through the network here and get to me for Dr. Greer, I will read it on the air. Jimmy at jimmychurchradio.com. You can also email us directly off of the website. You know where to go. Go to the contacts page. It's there. We use non-NSA special encrypted computers. Okay. The bumper music tonight, as always, is Doug Aldrich from Whitesnake. Thank you to Doug. The virtual Giza viewer, there's a mouthful, is still up. Go and check that out. Now, tonight, after the show, I will jump into the forums section on the website. Our website is designed for you, jimmychurchradio.com. Get over there. You're going to have lots of stuff to talk about after the show tonight. I will be there after the show, as I always am, and I will hang out. Over at Stan's blog, that's right, Gobekli Tepe. Go and read that article over at jimmychurchradio.com. There are some pictures there that are fascinating. And if you don't know anything about Gobekli Tepe, that's why you listen to this show. You get educated. You learn something every day. Go and read about Gobekli Tepe. And when you look at those pictures, just remember one thing. 14,000 years old. Over at artbell.com, check out The Real Ghost Caught on Camera in the Clop Hill Church ruins. Fascinated with that today. Go and check out that video. Okay, this is what I'm going to do tonight. We're going to go the first hour without commercials. So we're going to break for a commercial now. And we're going to go without commercials for the first hour. And with Dr. Greer, and we'll be doing that in just a second. With Dr. Greer, we'll do the first hour. And we'll see how it goes. And we're going to do a second hour. And I don't know about commercials. I think the two of us are going to have a lot to say. And I'm so happy that he found the time to come on tonight. When we come back after the break, this is Fade to Black. We will have Dr. Stephen Greer. Stay with us, everybody. Don't go anywhere. Don't touch that mouse. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church, on the Dark Matter Radio Network. Stay with us.
You're listening to Jimmy Church, Fade to Black, on the Dark Matter Radio Network.
What's up, revolutionaries? It's me, Jimmy Church. Do you have an IRS or state tax issue? Well, I did, and I called national tax experts. My problems were fixed, done, Finney. And man, I got to tell you, it was a relief. National Tax Experts are a recognized tax office that services clients in all 50 states. It doesn't matter where you live. Give them a call. I'm telling you, they take the time to understand each and every client's individual financial status as well as their financial goals. And that's exactly what you need, my brother, when you're taking on the evil three-letter. So, seriously, give them a call today at 1-877-909-5444. Again, 1-877-909-5444. Or go check out their website, www.nattaxexperts.com. That's NATTAXEXPERTS.com. Tell them Jimmy sent you.
This is KJCR at JimmyChurchRadio.com.
On the Dark Matter Radio Network.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. Fade to Black. KJCR. JimmyChurchRadio.com on the Dark Matter Radio Network. What a great show we have got coming. I'm just fired up. Shoot me an email right now to Jimmy@JimmyChurchRadio.com. I will see those come in. If they filter through and it's good, I will read it on the air. Jimmy@JimmyChurchRadio.com. Be taking your calls a little bit later on. Yes, I'm watching the switchboards. You guys are calling in. We've got stuff to do. We'll be taking your calls in the third segment. Get in line. Okay. Now, really quick, I'm going to jump straight into this. Dr. Stephen M. Greer is the founder and director of the Disclosure Project in Serious Technology Advanced Research. He presided over the groundbreaking U.S. National Press Club Disclosure event in 2001. Dr. Greer is a lifetime member of the AOA, the United States' most prestigious medical honor society. He is the author of 4 insightful books and multiple DVDs on the UFO ET subject. He has been seen and heard by millions worldwide on CBS, the BBC, Joe Rogan, which was amazing, by the way. And if you haven't caught that, go check that out. The Discovery Channel, the History Channel, Thrive, and the Ancient Alien series. The film Sirius, which documents his work, premiered in April 2013 and was the largest crowd-funded documentary to date. Dr. Greer founded the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, CSETI, in 1990. I would like to welcome to the show live. I think you're in Florida. That's right, Dr. Greer?
Yes, I am in Florida, and it's been a nice break from the freezing cold in Washington and Virginia, where my farm is. Yeah.
Welcome to the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Now, it's funny you bring up the freezing cold, and you're in the warmth, and I'm in the warmth, and I feel guilty when I start off every show because we're here in Burbank, and it's sunny and nice almost every single day. And I know the country has been in just a catastrophic deep freeze for the last month or so. And yeah, I do feel a little guilty, but okay. Now, I do this with every guest, and our audience out there kind of expects me to make this testimonial when I start off every conversation. And that is this. This is just a conversation. You and I are sitting in my living room, just shooting the breeze. Okay. There's no agenda. Right. Let's just have fun with it. Where the conversation goes is where it ends up. If I find it interesting and you find it interesting, somebody out there is going to learn something.
Great.
Okay. All right. First, I didn't talk about, and you and I talked about this earlier today, I didn't go into your educational background in your intro because there's a lot of stuff there, and I only have so much breath when I do the intro. But where did you go to school?
Well, I went to a university initially in North Carolina, and then I got my medical degree in Tennessee, and then went back to North Carolina to do a residency. So it was sort of back and forth, and I ended up in doing emergency and trauma medicine, and for a while was chairman of emergency and trauma medicine at the hospital. And so, my background is in medicine, and I basically started this whole effort while I was working full time as an emergency doctor, which was no picnic, raising 4 children and doing emergency medicine, 100 hours a week, and then dealing with this stuff. But so that's really how I started out. When I started these projects, I was working as an emergency doctor and loved it. And it's a great experience to have. Other ER docs. There are a lot of ER docs who are actually on our team who have been drawn to it over the years because they know my background.
I noticed, I've followed your career and for a long time now and fascinated with it, but I did notice that you did have a multiple year overlap with, your career now and with the medical field. How did you manage to juggle both for so long?
With great difficulty. And, well, luckily, I have to say, given the social opprobrium and the ridicule that attends this subject, which has, of course, been part of the CIA plan since the 50s.
Right.
I have a document that clearly states that, by the way, that they plan to engage the media making ridiculous claims and ridiculous ridiculing commentary on the subject. And that document is from 1953, before I was born, and probably you too. So the point I'm making here is that luckily, I was already well established at working as a doctor when I sort of stepped forward on this issue. And, I think my colleagues, for the most part, thought it was a bit eccentric, a bit interesting. And I'll tell a story to people who tend to have a little cold feet about talking about the issue. On my way to doing that, at one point, I was the chairman of emergency medicine, and the chief of staff of the hospital asked me to do medical grand rounds, which is usually someone comes in to talk about the latest medical breakthroughs and blah, blah. Well, she wanted me to do it on UFOs and extraterrestrial intelligence. And I laughed out loud, literally, and said, no way, when hell freezes over, I'm not going to do that at my hospital, because I was afraid I would get all kinds of flack. She said, no, we're really serious. And in fact, initially, I thought she was just teasing me. She said, no, there's so many people interested. And I said, well, okay, so I don't want to do it anyway. So she came back the next month and said, won't you please reconsider? So I did it. It was standing room only. Now, I stuck with very nuts and bolts things, sightings, aircraft cases, landing cases, military witness testimony, and things of this sort. It was interesting because it was the best attended medical grand rounds in the history of the hospital. It was standing room only. People couldn't get in there because people really were so interested. And these are just regular. Like the head of surgery was there. All these people. Well, after this happened, I had to run a code blue, which is when someone dies and their heart stopped up in the ICU. And I was getting on the elevator afterwards, and on jumps the head of surgery, and it's this little guy, and his name is George. I won't go into his last name, but he said, Dr. Greer, I think what you're doing is the most interesting and important work, and don't give up no matter what you do. And he looked around to be sure no one was on the elevator before he said it. And as soon as the doors opened, he jumped off, and he never mentioned it publicly again. And I tell that story only to say that because the subject has so much ridicule associated with it and so much tabloid nonsense, people are afraid to kind of step out on the issue. But, frankly, behind closed doors, very senior people in all walks of life that I've had to deal with are incredibly interested and very concerned about the issue, but they don't want to admit it publicly because they're afraid they're going to be called, Dr. Moonbeam or Senator Moonbeam, or for that matter, Moonbeam. So I think that's one of the real challenges is for us to be able to put the evidence, the information out there in a way that people from all walks of life become comfortable discussing it.
With when you were still a practicing doctor, did you find a little bit of pressure when you were around your peers and maybe somebody talking behind your back a little bit? Did you feel that kind of your word is ridicule, but did you feel that kind of pressure?
No, I never did, because I was known as frankly, a very good doctor, and no, I didn't get that. I had some patients who came in who who had seen me on like Larry King or something, who would make a comment, not a disparaging comment, but just, oh, this is you, and so that kind of thing. No, I really didn't. I think that people knew I was serious about it, and that we were dealing with it in a very credible way, and most people at that point didn't know the sort of shuttle diplomacy that my team was involved in. Way back 20 years ago, I was going from my medical work and then flying up to Washington to brief President Clinton's first CIA director on stuff, because the president and the CIA director had been basically stiff-armed out of being briefed on it. And so, people knew I was, to some extent, deeply involved. They didn't know quite what I was doing, but there was actually more support than anything else.
There's always one event in somebody's life that changes things, some type of epiphany. Something happened to you as a young, what was it that caused you to have this, to make a choice in the fork in the road? You've got your family, you've got a medical career, or you can go left or right. Well, you chose to go right. What happened you had some type of event, and what was it?
Well, there's a book called Hidden Truths, Forbidden Knowledge that is now in 8 languages. That's about sort of how I got to be involved in this, and people can get that at SiriusDisclosure.com, SIRIUS Disclosure.com, which is our parent website now, and it describes that this was not one event. I was 8 or 9 years old. My uncle was working on designing the lunar module. He worked for Grumman, that became Northrop Grumman. And he was a aerospace engineer with Grumman. And so sort of the whole space thing within the family DNA. And then about that time, I had a crystal clear sighting of one of these objects. And I mean, daytime, seamless object that materialized, hovered. I was with some boys in the neighborhood, and then it vanished. Now, my parents, who were, very skeptical people to begin with, were going, yes, well, this was just the imagination of a little boy. Mm-hmm. But I knew what I had seen. Parents need to listen to their kids when they tell them things. And it ignited a lifelong interest. So I became one of these little kids running around 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, collecting every magazine and everything I could on the subject, and clandestinely had a stack about 6 feet high in my back of my closet where I was reading this stuff.
So you didn't have Playboys, you had UFO magazines, is what you're saying.
Well, I was only 9 or 10, yeah.
But so with your parents, you're trying, did they just, you imagined it? Is that what they tried to push on you, and you just couldn't convince them that what you saw was real?
Yes, at that age, but not years later. Years later, it became quite clear to them,
right,
that this was all very legitimate. And my father, prior to his passing, took a very strong interest in it. So there wasn't sort of any problem with that. And so luckily, my uncle as well, who was the guy at Northrop Grumman, of course, knew that this was legitimate, and was very encouraging for me to do the work I was doing. So, as a young doctor, it was hard, but I had a good support system.
So what is when you're in this, you're on CNN, but you're still a doctor, which I still don't know how you pull that off. At what point did you just have to sit down with your family and discuss, okay, this is what we're going to do, and we're probably not going to be as financially well off, which
right.
had to, that had to have been a concern, because I don't think anybody is out there getting rich on this subject. And
oh no,
exactly, and certainly
my wife and I laugh about that a lot. It's a labor of love, but I think that. When I realized, now you have to understand the Disclosure Project got really well known from the early 2000s till now. But in the 1990s, when I was first getting involved heavily with 2 major areas. One was organizing contact teams to go out and make observation and engage in protocols to make contact. And the other was the disclosure effort, putting the best evidence together. And so, we put together the best available evidence, which ended up going to brief President Clinton at the Rockefeller Ranch back in the 90s. And during that period, between the early 90s and the 2000 period, I realized slowly that the only way that this could happen would be that there'd have to be a big, dedicated, effort, and that I had to choose what I was going to do. And it was a hard choice because I'm, raising 4 children and putting them in college and all of that stuff that you have to do.
Right.
But we did it, and luckily, I have a wife who's a saint and is incredibly supportive. And so, we made that choice. But part of what I realized in the 90s was that the secrecy really didn't have anything to do with ETs. That was a minor part of it from carryover from the 40s and 50s, where they thought, what's going to happen? People are going to freak out that there's life in the universe. Well, in the last 20 years, it's gotten up to where about 2/3 of the public believe there's intelligent life in the universe. So then you have to ask the question, then what's the secrecy about? And it was over the course of talking to a lot of people in classified programs at my uncle's old company, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, SAIC, people in the intelligence community, that the technology that is behind the energy and propulsion system of these objects that the public sort of generically call UFOs has been studied for about 60 years, has been figured out, and if it were to be disclosed that these things are real, anybody's going to say, well, how are they getting here? How are they moving at 50,000 miles an hour and making a right-hand turn on radar? Proof that they're doing this. Well, anyone with their grain of salt as a physicist is going to say this is not normal aerodynamic propulsion and energy. And that would open the door to a whole new area of physics that would terminate the petrodollar, our current macroeconomic system, oil, gas, coal, nuclear power. All of it would go the way of royal typewriters or the horse and buggy.
Right.
And so I think that the trillions of dollars that are at stake in terms of maintaining the status quo, even if it is damaging the planet, even if we do get into one oil war after another, it's such a huge issue that people haven't known, who are the policymakers, what to do with it. And there are a certain number of them who just, frankly, don't want to see that change happen. And I think that it's something that, if you look at 50, 60 years of our society has been, if you want to look at it this way, held back from its potential because of the secrecy. So when I realized that the secrecy wasn't something trivial and that what was at stake was something of this magnitude, I felt I had to make a choice. And, there are a lot of doctors who can save lives in an ER and take care of shootings and stabbings and car wrecks and all that stuff. But I was someone who knew about this in a way where I think I could have made a difference, so I made that choice. It was hard. It was a very, very hard choice. It still is a hard choice. But, I think that's, at a certain point in your life, you have to make that kind of decision. And it's something that's big that is at stake. Because remember, if you look at the Canadian document from the Wilbur Smith document from 1951, I believe it is, from Canada, top secret document. And in this top secret document, this is not a contested document. It's up on our website. It's curiousdisclosure.com. It states that this subject is the most tightly held secret in the history of the United States and exceeds the secrecy of the development of the hydrogen bomb. Now, it states that. Now, this is in 1951 before we detonated the first H-bomb. So when you realize what's behind that secrecy, it isn't something that's trivial. So they had to trivialize it. And that's why, in one of these documents, it actually describes the CIA engaging Disney Studios to make things about flying saucers and little green men and what have you, and cartoons. And I think that the intelligence community knew what side of the bread that was buttered here, who is really calling the shots. And it's really the big money, big power interests that have been public and with what we consider liberty and freedom in the United States. Because when I first got invited to brief the Clinton administration people, I was told, and I still have this letter to proof of it, I have not thrown anything away, and it says, you're going to be the first person to brief the Clinton administration and the Director of Central Intelligence on this issue. They don't have access, and they're not being told anything. Well, I thought, to be honest with you, Jimmy, I thought this was a prevarication, a lie. And I thought, well, that's the biggest bunch of nonsense I've ever heard. What rubbish. And I got to the meeting, and what normally, with a cabinet level guy, you're going to be there for 15, 20, 30 minutes. This went on for almost 3 hours. Cover story being a dinner party. And the CIA director, Woolsey, looked at me very directly. He says, I agree with you. This should be disclosed. It shouldn't be secret. But how do we disclose something we don't have access to? And he was not acting. He's not that good of an actor.
Yeah, and why do you and I'm fascinated with the story, because why do you think, now I can understand maybe the president, and I've talked to a few people about this very subject, but Woolsey himself, isn't he the one guy that you would expect to know it all?
Yeah, but look, those guys come and go. You know what he told me? I mean, this is, to be honest, it's some years ago. I'll share this. He says, look, I'm a guy that goes up to Capitol Hill and brings X tens of billions of dollars back to the CIA. It's a huge organization. They certainly don't know everything going on. And the same thing with the general. I briefed a 3-star general who was head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, General Patrick Hughes. He told me point blank that he made inquiries through his command on this and got nothing. And someone had actually given him and ridiculed him by giving him a little toy E.T. doll. But he knew he was being lied to, which is why I'm sort of the last stop on the F train. If I get called into a meeting like this, it's often because it's someone who knows there's something here. They've seen the smoke and they know there's fire, but someone is deceiving them. Now, does this mean all CIA directors haven't known? No. I know that George Bush Sr. didn't know. I know that when Jimmy Carter, the incoming president, asked him to be briefed on this, Bush turned to Carter and said, I'm not going to tell you. He didn't say, I don't have any information on the UFO issue. Carter had a signing, President Carter had in Georgia when he was governor,
right,
like Ronald Reagan had. But Bush basically said, I'm not going to tell you. Go and see if you can get it from the Congressional Research Service or something like that, and brushed him off. So what people have asked me is that, well, then who knows and who doesn't? I said, well, it's not your rank. It's whether you came up through the ranks, plural, and you're willing to go along with an agenda of brutal secrecy that will be enforced as an unacknowledged, totally unacknowledged project. We can get into this in a little while. The film Sirius that you mentioned, which, by the way, people can see online now, it's up at SiriusDisclosure.com. Sirius, like the star system, SIRIUS, or Sirius XM for that matter. And what you're going to find when you look at the movie, there's enough information just to sort of teases people with this, that you begin to realize that there is a cabal. It's very shadowy, and they operate under these unacknowledged special access projects, which are beyond top secret. They are beyond the reach of most of the people that you and I would think would have access. I remember once briefing over there in Nevada we went to this looked like a little hall closet at McCarran Airport, and I was briefing a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Dick Bryan back then. And here he is. He's on the Senate Intelligence Committee. They're supposed to go into a secure communication intelligence facility, and be briefed on everything that is going on in the government. And he, like many others, told me he'd never been briefed on any of this, but he's not surprised this is going on, and he wanted to know what the heck is happening. So I think that the public has this kind of high school civics lesson idea of how our government runs, and the bad news is that it's broken worse than people think it is. It's really messed up. And I didn't think that was the case, by the way, starting out on this in the early 90s, mid-90s. But by the time I personally had enough of these meetings with people at that rank, and I mean, one of the guys I met with was the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, J2. Now think about this. This is the guy who puts together the intelligence assessment for the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the biggest military in the world. He I gave him a document that's up on our website. On the top header, there's a thing that says evidence, and there's just like zillions of things there. And this document was a secret document that hadn't been declassified, that was a National Reconnaissance Office, NRO document. That's the organization that runs all the super secret spy satellites.
Mm-hmm.
So I gave that to him. And this admiral, who was the head of intelligence joint staff, recognized a project code name that was on the paper that he had heard of, but didn't know what they did. So he contacted them. And when the admiral contacted them, they got back to him and said, "Sir, we know who you are, but we can't brief you on this project." And he says, "Damn it, I'm the head of intelligence for the Joint Staff. What do you mean I don't have a need to know?" They said, "No, sir, you do not have a need to know." He says, "Well, I want to be read into the project anyway." And they said, "Sir, we cannot discuss this with you." And they basically hung up on him. Now that, if you put it in a movie, it'd be hard for people to believe it.
Right.
But it's the truth. This is what I'm telling you is the truth. And so once I realized that there was another issue here, there's the secrecy, but then there's the illegal secrecy. And I make a distinction between the secrecy that you may not agree with that goes on at CIA and NSA, but the president and the Congress are actually in the loop. And then there's the illegal secret programs. Those are truly dangerous, and those are really the antithesis of what we have to have in a democracy and in a free society. So those are the projects that I have focused on.
I want to talk about that a little bit more in depth in just a second. Just really quick, your voice is coming in and going out. So just, we've heard everything, but you may be moving the phone around a little bit. So, just be a little conscious of that. Okay. But this is the thing. Is I have a hard time wrapping my head around, as an American in this country, that here you have each sitting president, which, by all means is the most supposed to be the most powerful person on planet Earth. And they go in and they sit down into office, and they're all of this secret information. Forget about UFOs, just everything else that's going on the planet. They're debriefed on everything. And it seems like each president is either confronted during the election process and about the UFO issue and disclosure. They talk about it, and then the second they take the oath and go into office, you never hear about it again. And so, is there actually somebody or a group? You said cabal, and I think that's a good way to put it. That has that much influence.
Sure. In fact, I'll tell you it's a little spooky, but we're sitting here late at night. We might as well get a little spooky. After I did these briefings, I had a man who was very close to President Clinton back then come to my home, and he said to me, he was at dinner, and all my kids were around the table, and he was sort of a operative. His brother used to sleep at the White House a lot and stay over, and I said, "Well, how's it going with what we're doing?" This man was very supportive of what we were advocating, by the way, ending the secrecy, bringing out the information, bringing out these 0-point energy technologies. And he says, "Well, the president's really very supportive of what you're recommending, because I'd done a white paper that's in my first book, Extraterrestrial Contact, The Evidence and Implications," is the title. He says, but they're convinced that if the president does what you're recommending, he'll end up like Jack Kennedy. And I started laughing, because the reason I started laughing is this guy was sort of known as a big jokester and a very kind of heavy-set, garrulous, funny guy. And he stopped me. He says, "No, I'm not kidding." I said, "Well, Kevin, don't talk about this in front of the children. Let's go to the library after dinner and talk about this." So we did, and he said basically that there were interests that were powerful enough that they felt it would be threatening. Now, whether or not that would have happened, I don't know. I mean, I'm not the president. I'm just working as a doctor in North Carolina who took an interest in this and then got kind of pulled into the middle of all this controversy. But ultimately, I came to realize that a lot of these folks, they may know something, and someone will come in and tell them something, but having some knowledge and having access control, if you want to look at it that way, over the projects. And this is what Eisenhower, before the day he left office, basically said, beware the military-industrial complex. He was an anti-military. He was talking about these rogue elements that had completely infiltrated the intelligence community, the Pentagon, the corporate world, that were completely out of control. He knew that they were out of control, and it was on mostly this subject, this issue. And one of our witnesses was actually at the White House as a young officer and used to see Eisenhower doodle making pictures of UFOs on papers during staff meetings, and spoke to Eisenhower. And the president was very frustrated by the fact that, yes, he knew about it. He knew about it much more than subsequent presidents, but he had lost control over this sort of octopus of the military-industrial complex that had become more compartmented, more secret, more unacknowledged, more black. So I think that, there's a 50, 60-year history here that most Americans don't realize exists. And it's a tragedy for our country. So that's another thing, because in my mom's family, my mother was a daughter of the American Revolution. Her family were some of the original people in the American Revolution. And, we sort of take this thing of the rule of law and freedom and, democracy somewhat seriously. And it was just this appalling and, the chutzpah, frankly, of a group of people going this far where they would leave a president or a CIA director out of the loop or just flat out lie to them. Now, I mentioned this issue to a member of Ronald Reagan's National Security Council staff, and in my naivete, being in my early 30s or whatever at the time, or mid-30s, I said, well, would these elements actually lie to the president? And he laughed out loud, and he says, oh, Dr. Greer, he says, we lie to the president all the time if we don't want the old man to know anything. We don't want him to know he's not going to know.
That's interesting.
And I said, my God. Oh, yeah. So, it's sort of a very jaundiced and cynical view of Washington, but it's an accurate one.
Back in 1947, well, from that period, from 47 to 50, 51, it seemed like the government it didn't have an issue with discussing this openly. Oh, we can talk about the Roswell papers and the newspapers and the radio and stuff, but that's part of it. But it seemed like that they were not afraid of the public reaction, and then to the subject, and then suddenly everything was clamped down in 50 and 51. And I think where you're going with this, and I just want to be perfectly clear, because my opinion was always a little different until I heard what you just said, which is this was all money driven, oil and industrial.
Power driven.
Okay.
Yeah, it was power driven, because once, I have a man that I've known for many years. He stayed at my home. He's one of the highest ranking scientists at the largest Department of Defense lab in the United States. I'll leave it at that. And this man had been in, quote, the vault, where some of the documents that people have heard about came from, but he saw them unredacted. And he basically said that between the late 40s and the early 50s, we figured out, quote unquote, gravity control and anti-gravity, and figured out how these things really operate in a very detailed way. And he said it was October of 54 that everything got sanitized and was burrowed even more deeply into more secretive underground facilities, completely segmented away. And when the Rockefeller Commission reorganized the Department of Defense, this is Nelson Rockefeller, not the Lawrence Rockefeller, whose branch I'd gone out to. Nebson reorganized it in such a way that the military and the Pentagon and the CIA became so labyrinthine or Byzantine that it was very hard to penetrate, which is actually how Eisenhower ended up losing control over all of this. And, of course, as they say, the rest is history. But, yes, it had to do with science, technology, and the implications of that being known. Because the implications of it, okay, you say, well, 60 years ago, but 60 years ago, big oil was still big oil. The keen coal was still keen coal.
Right.
The petrodollar was still very key in the post-World War II era. And so, it's this long history of something being kept secret. It's like Senator Barry Goldwater, when I was talking to him about this after he retired, he's the guy who had, John McCain took his seat in Phoenix, in Arizona. And I was talking to him. I was sitting in his living room, and he said, it's a goddamn mistake now. It's a goddamn mistake then that this was ever kept secret. This is Senator Goldwater saying this to me. And I said, well, yes, sir, it is. And I said, but, will you help us? And he said, I'll do whatever I can. So we started going through a list of some of the people I knew who were part of this cabal, and we landed on a name that he knew, Admiral Bobby Ray Inman, who had been head of the National Security Agency and Deputy Director CIA, who had moved over to be on the board of Science Applications International Corporation. And Barry said, oh, I know Bobby Ray. We've been friends for years. I said, well, will you contact him for me and see if we can find a way to resolve this problem? He said, sure, I will. Well, a couple weeks later, I hear back from Senator Goldwater, and he says, I can't make any more phone calls like that for you, Dr. Greer. I wish you the best of luck.
Right.
Well, I don't know. No, I don't know what happened. I'll have to tell you, Jimmy, but someone took the fear of God in Senator Goldwater. And I have a nice letter from him, and, but it was made very clear to him, back off of this.
Well, I think all of us, myself included, I think we felt that Inman was ready. He was on the fence. You know what I mean? He was right there, and actually spoke about it and privately with and then all of a sudden there was nothing. Yeah, and
right. Same thing with Ben Rich, the head of the Lockheed Skunk Works. We have one of our disclosure project witnesses who worked at Lockheed, the super secret skunk works up there in the high desert of California. Right. And Ben Rich began to talk about this, and then as someone must have put the fear of God in him or something. So I think that, there's a lot of intimidation, there's a lot of threats, there have been deaths, and I think ultimately this is why I concluded I felt I had a moral responsibility to offer this first to the executive, to the president, to the Congress. I actually met with the Boutros Ghali, the people at the United Nations at the time, and said, look, we need to fix this problem. But no one wanted to do it. They were either afraid of the ridicule or they were afraid of direct threats. And so I said, well, then the people need to do it. So that's what we're doing. I mean, since the early 2000s, for the last decade or so, I said, it's up to we, the people, to do disclosure. It's up to we, the people, to make peaceful contact with these civilizations. And it's up to we, the people, to bring out these technologies, because it isn't going to happen, I think, from the centers of power. The centers of power are either intimidated or corrupt, or frankly just don't have the courage to do it, that they just don't want to be bothered.
You touched upon this earlier. I don't want to let this thought get away from me, but concerning oil back in the 50s, and one of the, looking back with hindsight, we all know that old adage, but back then, oil, the consumption wasn't what it is today. That's the first thing.
Right.
And oil was infinite and it was cheap. But today we have issues, and peak oil is now something that has been talked about. And when you look around, not only the obvious infrastructure with trucking and cars, that's the obvious thing. But then we have, the airline industry. How do you think these planes are going to fly in 10 years? So now it's a concern today for not only, it's not the oil producing countries and the money that's there, but it's the other infrastructure and that money that needs to keep running. And now I would think it's more of an issue with the 0 point energy and gravity, that now maybe somebody needs to step forward and look at some alternatives. Otherwise, these planes aren't going to fly.
Well, this was the point. This is the point I made a few months ago. Just in the last few months, I was at a meeting, and there were 120 leaders, world leaders, and leaders in different segments from around the world there. And I was invited to come and speak to this group. And I was sort of shocked, but the guy who organized this meeting, it's sort of like a really small Davos sort of event, said, "Would you come?" And I said, I thought it was a joke. I said, "Sure." And, the year before, the guy who presented there was the recently retired director of national intelligence. And 2 years before that, it was Bill and Hillary Clinton. And they're wanting me to discuss this issue. And I went, what is going on?
Right.
And my wife and I thought, well, should I do this? Well, I couldn't bring any security or staff. My wife was invited to attend with me because she didn't want to, it was such a long trip. She didn't want to go. It was out in the middle of an ocean somewhere. And so I said, well, I'll do it. So I went, and what was interesting is that most of the people there really didn't know anything about the issue. The few who did, they looked at me like they wanted me to drown me off the pier, frankly. But I think that the more interesting point that the organizers of this, and the man who organized it is very good friends with the Clintons and with Mikhail Gorbachev, and kind of helped start the Davos efforts, and is a really big guy on the world stage. And he, in the closing 10 minutes of the whole three-day event, said, because a lot of people were really mad that I was there. They're furious, actually. Because you had senior people from BP and the coal industry and the oil industry and Goldman Sachs and McKinsey and God knows all these things. And talk about being in the belly of the beast. And I said, at the last 10 minutes, he says, you need to listen to this, because 20 years ago, you laughed at me when I talked about something called the internet becoming a big thing. And a few years ago, you laughed about this issue about peak oil and climate change and stuff. This person is describing what the next big thing is. Now, this just happened, so all your listeners listening to this going, they asked me not to go into detail of who was there, and I said, that's fine, I won't. I'm not going to betray your confidence, and I don't do that. But what was interesting is the reaction, because it went from denial to hatred to complete confusion. So I sort of dropped the bomb on this group, and now what we're doing is we're taking all the military disclosure witness testimony from all these top secret guys and the documents and the material we have, and we have it on a DVD that's being passed around to all these 120 people. But what I think is happening, by the fact that I got invited to something like this, and now that same folks are up at Davos in Switzerland, the World Economic Forum, talking to all these people, I think that people are trying to learn about it, even the people who aren't part of the secrecy. And the message from the organizers of this event was, we have to see opportunity from disruption, because this information and these technologies have to come out. There is no other choice, and you need to know about it now and start making preparations. It was a very interesting 3 days, I'll tell you. But that was the gist of it, just exactly what you're talking about. But these people, the wise elders of this group, are saying, you got to make plans.
I've got a quickie. I just want to have a little fun for a second. I've got a bunch of email in a row. I'm going to read this one really quick. I would have asked this question myself anyway, so we'll get this in. This is from Kim. It's, what are your thoughts on the fact that thus far there have been no mass showings of craft worldwide at once to make their own disclosure obvious? That's in parentheses. Even though many of us are very aware of large organizations of benevolent ETs that could very well do so.
Yeah, well, part of that question assumes facts not in evidence, two facts not in evidence. The first one being that such massive events haven't happened. They have happened. The Phoenix event, where this massive craft flew over a major metropolitan area seen by thousands of people. The Belgian events. There was an event in the early 90s over Montreal, over Rome. This has happened. The fact that the corrupt mainstream media that are, for the most part, lackeys of these corporate and intelligence interests doesn't cover it doesn't mean it hasn't happened. Now, could they do something where they would force the issue? Yes. But contrary to what I think the person asking this question thinks, I think there's a myth out there that there's sort of this, the malevolent, the good and the bad ETs and this and that. My experience with this is that any civilization that was malevolent towards us in the truest sense of the word could have put an end to the nonsense on this planet decades or centuries or a millennia ago. My main take on it is that there are many different ET species, and I think some are probably getting rather dismayed with what we're doing to Gaia, the planet, and to each other. Remember, there's over half the world's population doesn't even have literally a pot to pee in, a toilet in their house. There are, the statistic that just came out of Davos this week is that 85 of the richest people in the world have a net worth greater than 3.5 billion people on Earth. That's half the population of the Earth. So we have a situation that is out of control. And one of the things I point out to people say, well, there is no such thing as climate change or global warming. It's happening because of sunspot activity. I said, look, that's beside the point. We have a macroeconomic system that requires half the population of the world be enslaved in economic poverty of some type, on top of which all the toxic stuff we're doing with nuclear power plants like Fukushima and pollution and what have you. But setting the environment aside, even if you didn't care about the environment, if you look at the human suffering that's a result of the current macroeconomic system, that is a direct result of our energy and petrodollar system. That's a huge issue, and that's what's got to get fixed. And so I think there are the ETs, as I understand it, are waiting for humans to fix this problem because, if any group, no matter what you think their motives are, and you can debate that all day, it's like counting the angels on the head of a pin, it's sort of fruitless. But whatever the motives may be, if they were to do something like that, two things would happen. First, it could induce panic, and they're smart enough to know that. Secondly, the militarists and the warmongers would spin it as, it's alien invasion week. And guess what? One of the subtexts of the secrecy is not just the macroeconomic issue. It's taking the information, spinning it as if there's a threat out there. And I just got a phone call an hour ago from a deep source in the intelligence community telling me about a Project Thunderbolt up there near Provo, Utah, and other places that one of the contractors is using to target ET craft with these massive electromagnetic 7 million watt discharges. Anybody out there who knows and has worked on Project Thunderbolt should get hold of me, because this is an actionable piece of information I'm putting out over the airways for the first time tonight. But my point is that clearly, given the crazy things we've been doing for 60 years, if they wanted to make a show like this, they could. But I think that stepping back, let's step way back for a minute, they see that humans have the ability, usually at the last second, to do the right thing. As Churchill said, you can always count on the Americans to do the right thing after they tried everything else. But but I think humans, as a rule, have this history of learning lessons kind of the hard way. What I'm hoping is that we do it in a wiser way than the hardest way. We bring the information out. We find a way to make peaceful contact with these civilizations, and we bring these technologies out. But I think that that's a rational thing to do. But there are stakeholders, these uber elites. And we're not talking about the 1% here. We're talking about the 0.0000000.
Right.
All right, let's get clear on that.
Yes.
The people whose sovereign wealth fortunes are in the trillions of dollars and things like this. So those folks are the ones who kind of like this centralized power system. But when you have a free energy or 0-point energy device running your car in your home or your village in Africa or South America or India, guess what? That whole power dynamic changes. So I tell people it is literally a democratization that they would not be able to stop, because the centralized power and the corruption that has gone with it over the last half century, or century actually, would no longer be able to stand on its own. And I think this is the issue people have to understand. The ETs know that that's a huge change that has to happen. But if they forced it, would it be like us going to Afghanistan thinking that we're going to enforce Jeffersonian democracy in a medieval, feudal, warlord society? I mean, this is, it's better if we educate each other, come together as a people, make these changes. If the ETs have to do it, that's really going to be bad. That means that we've really gotten to the point where we're an imminent biosphere collapse, or the Dr. Strangelove nut jobs in these laboratories in the United States and elsewhere have developed weapon systems that are a true existential threat to the ETs. Now, I will tell you that if you look at the Disclosure Project witness testimony, not only from Werner von Braun's spokeswoman, Dr. Carol Rosin, but other people, you see this pattern. In fact, I met with a colonel who, at the time that Carter and Reagan were transitioning, was on a team trying to sell the whole Star Wars things to them. And he told me one of the things they were selling is that there's an alien threat, and we have to have a weapon system to fight them. And he told me, he says, everyone knew that was false. It was a complete false flag. Forget the Gulf of Tonkin and Vietnam. This is the big boogeyman that's been created. And if you think that with trillions of dollars, as Rumsfeld said, you see this in the film Sirius, Sirius, that just came out. Rumsfeld at the Pentagon, the day before 9/11, says there's $2.3 trillion unaccounted for, missing out of the Department of Defense budget. Well, with that kind of money, you can do all kinds of what is called stagecraft, to hoax pseudo-ET contact events, to hoax things, to make people think there's a threat when there is none. Who would benefit from this? The usual guys who are the foxes guarding the hen house, the big warmongering crowd, and the ones who are making a lot of money from it. So one of the interesting things that you see is that there has been this transition, this arc, which was predicted by Werner von Braun as he was dying. He says, well, we have the Cold War. After that, we're going to have global terrorism. After that, we're going to have concerns about asteroids and have to have weapons in space. And that was just announced that the Russians and Americans are working on that together. And then the big thing that we've always planned to play is to hoax a threat from outer space from ETs. And he says it's all a hoax. And what's interesting is that I've heard this from so many people deep on the inside, and yet the stock and trade on the internet on this subject, it's filled with this sort of subtext that was in the question you just read.
Right. We're going to take a break. I want to ask one question before we take a break, which is this. Are we in contact with ETs right now? Is the government actually in contact right now?
I doubt it. There are reports that people have put out there saying that we are. There are things that people have seen, creatures that look like ETs, but they're not. And this gets into a long discussion. We have anti-gravity devices that look like a UFO, but they're made by Lockheed Martin and my uncle's old company, Northrop. And you have creatures that look like, quote, aliens, but they're not.
Right.
The stagecraft, the deception that goes on with this subject is enormous. And so, I kind of think not. Now, I do think there have been attempts to make that kind of contact, and there's a report that Eisenhower, in fact, did, and I tend to believe that report back in the early mid-50s. I think it was 54. But whether there's any ongoing, I doubt. Now, my organization, CSETI, in fact, we're going to do an expedition out in Arizona. Where some of your studios are up in the mountains outside Tucson in April, where we train people to do the remote viewing and the contact protocols to make contact. And we have an app where people can study this. Because what I think people have to understand is that, the ETs are around, and they can appear in all kinds of weird and mysterious ways. But I don't think we need to be expecting the government to be the prime movers on that. I think, if anything, they'd make a mess of it. If they have had contact, they've made a mess of it. And I think we need to also reclaim that. We, the people, need to reclaim the diplomatic initiative.
Let's take a break. Dr. Greer, do you have a landline that you can call us back on?
No, I do not.
Okay, let's just keep moving then. And again, we can hear everything. It just comes in and it goes out a little bit. So you just might be moving the phone around and so it's not that big of a deal. And let's just go ahead and take a quick break. And cueing the music now. Okay, so let's take a quick break. We'll be back in a couple of minutes, and I want to talk about the Atacama humanoid. Okay.
All right.
We'll be right back
Great.
after this. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church, on the Dark Matter Radio Network. Stay with us, everybody. One 800-916-6232. That's the number you need to call when you are seeking spiritual enlightenment and searching for your true purpose here on earth. www.lovespellstoday.com. They provide psychic readings, love spells, reversal of spells, custom spells, chakra balancing, energy work. Divine guidance is just one phone call away. Call 1-800-916-6232 for your free psychic reading. I did. And tell them Jimmy sent you.
Hello, and you're listening to my main man, Jimmy Church, on jimmychurchradio.com.
My name is Nick Dominguez. Hi, I'm Rex Dominguez, and I listen to jimmychurchradio.com. Jimmy, your preacher.
Amen. This is Toby Kebbell. You're listening to jimmychurchradio.com. Don't hurt me, Jimmy. I'm only little.
Hey, I'm Adrian Grenier. And this is Ari Gold. We're the Honey Brothers. Yes. We're of the Honey Brothers. Hey, I'm Adrian Grenier.
And I'm Ari Gold.
We're the Honey Brothers.
And you're listening to Jimmy Church.
The Revolution.
KJCR.
jimmychurchradio.com.
Despite popular opinion, reading a book will not make you smarter.
But listening to Jimmy Church will. On the Dark Matter Radio Network.
All right, everybody, welcome back. KJCR. This is Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. We are on the Dark Matter Radio Network. Got a bunch of email. Keep them coming. Jimmy at jimmychurchradio.com. Follow us on Twitter. We are monitoring that as well. We will try to get some phone calls in later on in the third segment. Okay, we're sitting here talking with Dr. Stephen Greer, CSETI and Sirius and the Disclosure Project. And I want to, Dr. Greer, are you still with us?
I am.
Okay. Oh, you sound better. Okay. I want to talk about Sirius. I have a quick question from one of the listeners here, and it says, please ask Dr. This is from Renee of Tucson, Arizona. Please ask Dr. Greer about the growth of the movement he started decades ago and the individuals all now leading various groups of people to do what Dr. Greer used to do all by himself. Stephen Bassett, he was on the show last week, by the way. Costa Macraeus with ET Contact, Ted Loader, investigating zero-point energy systems, MUFON Director, Military Pilot Witness George Filer, and Paola Harris, of course, etc. How has that growth been? I mean, has it just been? It started off so small, and where is it today? I mean, how is it going?
Well, there are two levels of this. I mean, there's what people who are like ones you've mentioned and many others who are doing things in their own communities in their own way to advance this, which is really needed. And also there are the CSETI contact teams. We have an app. You can go to our website, and there's an app you can get that actually will turn your phone into a magnetic field meter, and it goes through the whole protocols for doing these contact protocols, and it's for Android and iPhones. Anyone can get those. We now have several thousand of these teams out there doing that. And what's interesting, we had it's this big movement worldwide that I rarely get to talk about much because people focus mainly on the technology and science and disclosure part of it. But like we recently got a thing from a guy who was in Croatia and was a truck driver who was practicing this and was doing the protocols, and this UFO materializes and floats right over his rig when he's at a rest stop out in the mountains. What's interesting is that the ETs, I think, are eager for people to do this and to empower ourselves to do it. And I think to the extent that we do that, we're going to see a big response. And the more that people do it, it kind of creates this, what Rupert Sheldrake calls this morphogenic field effect in consciousness and awareness. It really does change things. So I think that's really where the action always happens. And so it's grown exponentially. And I think there's another level, and that's what I was referring to earlier, by a lot of these people who are in governmental positions, in corporate positions, taking the whole matter seriously and looking into it in depth. And that's a bit of a heavier lift. You know, the people are always ahead of the leaders. You know, if the people will lead, the leaders will follow, I always say.
That's right. That's really right. Well, that's how it should be, at least.
Well, that's how it should be. And
right.
That's how it is if you have the quasi-open society. And I think that's what's happening at this point, because the film Sirius, when it came out, I don't know if you know this, it had something like, I don't know how many million people read about it at the Huffington Post. For almost a whole week, it was the top story on the Huffington Post. So what you find is that these sort of events, and we're going to do more this year along the same lines. You know, that's why I'm down in Florida. I can't go into it more than that, but we're working on some fantastic things. But people who are in leadership positions around the world, like this leadership group that I was meeting with a few months ago, are really delving into this more deeply and more seriously than ever before. The public understands this. There's more and more information. Now, with that, there's also more and more disinformation. And that gets to this issue. Up on my website, I have an article I wrote of when disclosure serves secrecy. Because you can take the same set of facts, spin it in a way like they did for the Gulf of Tonkin incident that got us into the Vietnam debacle. And it can be spun in whatever direction. So the spin meisters are hard at work, and they always are. But if the people stay with things that they know that they can do, make contact, make observations, look at the evidence, and help put together the thrust to bring out these technologies, because it isn't going to happen from the Department of Energy. Let me tell you.
Right, of course.
Okay, or even a big corporation or a big venture capital group in Silicon Valley. Not likely to happen. I've been that route. You know, I've met with billionaires and flown around on their private jets and tried to get them to get involved with this stuff, and they just look at me like, no way. Not me stepping on too many big toes. I'm not going to, you know, they'll flat out say, I'm not going to step on this 800-pound gorilla's toes. So I think that the people, though, can do that. Lots of people. And that's really, really encouraging. And I think that's really how the change that we're looking for is going to happen. It's unlikely to come from the Congress and unlikely to come from the White House. It doesn't mean that I don't spend time with people in those circles. I just told you about this adventure I was on for 3 days. And if looks could kill, let me tell you. You know, if you've read the book To Kill a Mockingbird, and they talk about the hate stare.
Yes.
The racist South.
Yes.
All right. That, boy, did I get that a lot at this thing. But I think, you know, we have... I was so ready to get off that island by the time the 3 days were up. But
right.
Think, oh, how wonderful! You're in this exotic place with all these muckety mucks. I'm going, oh Lord, beat me up, Scotty, would you? Part of me, the other part of me, really enjoyed doing it as a service thing. But you know, I do it. You know, all these things I do, by the way, are done for free, without charge. You know, there's no like consulting fee that we do. I mean, everything I've done on this is a pro bono thing, and so the people who support our website and the film, that helps support all this other stuff we're doing, because, you know, if you want to do this stuff, you have to have the means to do it. And I want to thank everyone, by the way. I know there are thousands of people listening who crowdfunded and supported the film Sirius, and I do want to thank them. We absolutely couldn't have gotten this far without them.
I'm on that thought with Sirius, and it's a well done movie, well shot and edited. You know, it's a great film, and I couldn't wait for it to come out. And you're absolutely right about the Huffington Post promo, because I was chomping at the bit and trying to find it somewhere before. You know, I thought somebody's got to have snuck this out. They sneak Spielberg films are out. I couldn't find it,
Right.
but I eventually, I've seen it a few times. Now, do you? This is my thought, and don't take this the wrong way, but I just have to say, from one creative guy to another, do you wish that maybe you waited maybe another 6 months because more information could have been put into the film? That has come out now, specifically about the humanoid, but also about 0 Point Energy and some of the other disclosure projects that are going on now. The film would have been a little more complete if you had just waited maybe another 3, 4, 5, 6 months.
Well, you can always wait, and this has been such a rapidly evolving movement over the last 10 or 15 years that the other thing that people who live and breathe this subject on the internet and stuff have to understand, this film was made for, the general public, people who really know nothing about it. It wasn't made for someone who lives 6 hours a day clicking around YouTube videos and stuff.
Right.
Okay, so, some people, I said, you have to, and the second point is that I wasn't a filmmaker, and I'm not a filmmaker. I'm an emergency doctor, and then I run these projects, and it's enough. But there are things that I would have had in it that aren't. There are things in it I wouldn't have had in. However, the thrust of it was to provide a sort of a primer, a sort of introductory view of the issues in a way that would be well produced, that could be brought out to the public. And it's interesting. We just signed to have this broadcast all throughout Asia, in Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, Brunei, Malaysia, all over. And so there's a lot of exciting things happening. We just actually signed up a big worldwide group that's going to Berlin Film Festival right now with the film. I mean, it's only been out 8 or 9 months, and see, we didn't have, usually when you release a film like this, you have a huge advertising and release budget. There was none for this. We just did it all grassroots, but it's still gone around the world in a way that's amazing. And so that's because of the people out there who are listening tonight who's helped us. And again, thank you all. But there are a lot of things happening right now. In the last 48 hours, we just signed a big representative group that's going to be taking this to all the big film festivals and getting this into more and more countries for broadcast on television and what have you. So now, are there things that certainly before we had the premiere in L.A., and I don't know if you were at the premiere, but I mean, we had 2 premiere theaters at L.A. Live, completely sold out.
Right.
And I think it was the day before we had this wonderful gathering of, there's a singer and an actress named Paula Abdul who hosted us at her home, and it was so lovely. And we just had so many, Matt Bodine was there, and Tim Robbins, and all kinds of folks came, and Joe Rogan, of course, was at the premiere. What we found was that there were people who wanted more, and there were people who went, oh my God, this is too much. This is more than I can absorb. So, you know what? You can only do so much in an hour and 50 minutes. Now, what we want to do eventually is that we have a whole series of these, because there's so much information, but you have to kind of start somewhere with something that gives people, opens the door, and makes them say, gosh, maybe I should look into this, which is really what the intent was.
Dr. Greer, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, you dropped out for just a second, but now you're back. And sorry about that. I had a little bit of a panic attack, and we were talking. I have another question from one of the listeners, but and remember, I'm battling this cold, and I just remembered you and I were talking earlier about that. And if there's a silence, well, I thought I was going to sneeze. And it didn't happen. Now, with my watery eyes as I look at the monitor, at some point in time, are you hoping to organize a mass contact attempt, coordinating people to make a simultaneous call to those other beings in an attempt to finally have the public contact the ETs that shatters the illusion around this topic? Now, that actually, that's a great question. And
we have done that, actually. We have done it. We have coordinated these things with a couple thousand teams around the world on certain nights, and there have been amazing sightings people have had. Now, a lot of people say, then why don't they just go ahead and land on the White House lawn? The famous question that Larry King asked me. Why don't they land? I said, look, first of all, they'd be blown out of the sky. Secondly, Now, this is something this sounds like science fiction, but it's true. Years ago, I met with a man who developed what's called a neutrino light detector. This was in early mid-70s, so 40 some years ago. And this device was seized under a national security order because people at the NRO, National Reconnaissance Office, that runs all the super secret satellites, figured out this could be used to detect ET craft when they're coming out of trans-dimensional space-time, stepping down into 3D. We can get into this in a minute. It's kind of, for many people, abstract, but it's just you visualize something that's able to go transluminal beyond the speed of light, coming back into 3D. And you have to, by the way, people say, oh, well, aren't they interdimensional and not ET? I said, well, they're both. If you're interstellar and you mean you've gone faster than the speed of light, you are also passing through other dimensions and energy resonant forms. And this is really what I specialize in, to be honest with you, although it gets so arcane, most people, they go, oh my God, be quiet. My brains are going to fall out of my ears.
Right.
But the interesting thing about it is that when you think about it, okay, let's say that there's a craft and it's just hovering, but it's still shifted. All the matter, all the metal, all the beams on board are shifted beyond the resonant field of detectable light. But if they come into 3D, these neutrino light detectors that they put on satellites back in the 70s will pick that up, and then they're targeted. Let me tell you what happened to us once a couple years ago up in Mount Shasta. We were up there with a contact team, about 30, 40 people I was training, and we had this luminous object emerge from the volcano. It was not way up in the sky, and it was floating towards us, and there was a high-altitude aircraft that suddenly a huge burst of energy came out of it, some kind of electromagnetic pulse weapon, very directional, that crashed into the forest a couple hundred yards in front of us. Just before that thing fired, this craft fully dematerialized again and disappeared. Now, 30 or 40 people saw that. So what I tell people is that it isn't as if there's, yes, they can come and go, and there are times where they can come and go with more safety than others, but all these, what used to be called crash retrieval events that have happened, people, if they think that these beings have gone from one star system to another one, or one planet to another, and somehow just can't find their way across the desert of Roswell, New Mexico without crashing, this is silly. They're being targeted. And there have been advanced Tesla-type electromagnetic weapons that have been in development since the 20s, 30s, and 40s. These are classified systems. They have been used to target ET craft. So the kind of event like that would be massive and would be there, would have with it the possibility of some kind of targeting of them. Now, could the ETs shut those systems off? Yes.
Right.
But if they did that, here's the problem. If they do it, then these controllers, the sort of warmongering crowd are going to say, see, we had our systems disabled. Just like the intercontinental ballistic missiles up there at Minot, North Dakota, we brought information out about the Malmstrom Air Force Base event, and there were 16 or to 20 intercontinental ballistic missiles that were rendered unlaunchable. Well, the men that I've spoken to who were there said they felt that the ETs were saying, please don't blow up this beautiful planet, but if you go to mutual assured destruction, we can slow that down. But other people have taken the same set of facts and said, see, the aliens were invading and attacking our defense system.
Right.
So you can take the same set of facts and spin it any way you want to. And if you want to be xenophobic and paranoid, you can. So I know that the ET, if I figured this out, I figure the ETs have a few hundred IQ points higher than mine. They have probably figured out that they can only push that envelope so far without there being a response from these weapon systems, or if they disable the weapon systems, that could lead to that event being spun as an attack. And that's what they're trying to avoid. They're trying to avoid something that sinks us from, World War I and II to what many of you may know, that General MacArthur, at his last speech to the Congress, said World War III will be interplanetary.
Right.
So,
right.
For 50 years, there have been people scheming to make that happen, and it's a huge problem. This is the biggest problem I face, by
Well, we had Bob Salas on the show last month or 2 months ago, and it's something that for Bob, I think that. By the way, for everybody, before I even tell this thought or get this thought out, Colonel Salas was one of the controllers in the bunkers up at Malmstrom Air Force Base when everything shut down. And for Bob, I just feel that he wants to talk about it, but I just think that he's a little frustrated in because he's telling the truth, and the government is trying to take another, and he has been seriously swimming upstream with this for a long time, and for somebody in his position. This is a very, 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 very educated, decorated individual that should be taken as serious as anybody. No pun intended, by the way. But he, and when you listen to, there's one specific thing about his experience, which is this: these missiles are independent. Okay, their systems are hardwired. It's not. And the odds of one going down is extreme. Two going down at the same time, impossible. The odds are astronomical. Go play the lottery. You're gonna hit that before two of these go down. But 16, right. And he said he sat there and watched. And I asked him. I said, "Okay, what is it like a red light and a green light? That goes off." He said, "Exactly." And they just went pop, 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 pop right in front of us. And that's an extraordinary situation that literally gets ignored.
Oh, it does. And, for those of you, the people listening right now, if you go to SiriusDisclosure.com, SIRIUS disclosure.com, all one word, and if you click on evidence, under that evidence heading are witnesses, military witnesses. At the very bottom, if you scroll down, his testimony is linked to on that page. We have several dozen, not one or two. New York Times, if they have 3 credible sources for something, we'll run with it. Right. We have several dozen of these testimonies up on our website for free. Anyone can click there and see it right now. And what I tell people is that, what they forget. And I talked to Sam Donaldson of ABC News about this some years ago. He had done a story for, I think, Primetime Live, where a very similar event, a little bit different, was happening in the Soviet Union. So what I think the ETs were doing was making it clear that they did not want the superpowers to go to a full mutual assured destruction thermonuclear launch that would have ended all life on Earth. I think they have a long-term, longitudinal, maybe millions or thousands of years interest in Earth and how we develop. And they know that this kind of an event would have terminated life on Earth as we know it.
Let's be, I don't know how, this is the beauty of live radio and just having a conversation. We've got to talk about the Atacama humanoid. And
there's some breaking news on that that's fascinating.
And again, for those few listeners out there that don't know what we're talking about, we have pictures up that we've grabbed from your website. They're actually at jimmychurchradio.com, so you can go over and check those out. So you understand what we're talking about. But for the documentary, for me, beginning to the end, the documentary was great. But obviously, that was a focal point for the documentary and for me. And what I don't get, now we're talking about how many inches long, really quick, just for a visual for everybody. 6 inches. Humanoid figure and humanoid is only describing what it looks like, but obviously this little guy, 6 inches long, walked on this planet at some point because he is fully, or he or she is fully developed. And there's one other point I want you to touch upon as we're going to get to this breaking news now, but there's one thing that nobody for the skeptics out there, the debunkers out there on the subject that just gets ignored, and I wanted answered, and you're a medical doctor. The rib count is different from you and I, correct?
Yeah, it has 10 ribs, and there are really no genetic syndromes where humans have 10 symmetrical ribs.
Why isn't this point driven home? How many ribs do I have, doctor?
12. You have 12.
And this little guy has got 10. Is there
right? And also,
what's
the number of skull bones is totally different. The morphology on so many things are different, and it's symmetrical. So it's not a one-off mutation.
Right.
The other thing, which you're leaving out of this, is that the world's expert on skeletal defects at Stanford University, Dr. Ralph Walkman, did a formal report. That whole report with his signature is on our website, SeriousDisclosure.com. Go read it. If you can read English, it's in English. But here's the thing. He states categorically, according to the bone density and the growth plates in the bones, it's a 6 to 8 year old child. Now, I have delivered premature infants, but nothing 6 inches tall.
No.
And tell me how you get to be 6 to 8 years of age. And when I say that this is the world's expert in this area, he literally has written the textbooks, literally, at Stanford, at Ivy League school there in California. So when you look at his report, and then you look at this CAT scan, and the CAT scan is up there for anyone to see. The X-rays are up there for anyone to see. We've been very open about this. Now, where you get into the confusion, and this is where the Huffington Post went sideways, and Open Minds TV went sideways. Everyone went sideways. Dr. Nolan, who has done the work of the genetics, we clipped some ribs, okay? I had to damage the little guy a little bit, and took bone marrow from the ribs. It was all done forensically. Dr. Nolan at Stanford extracted the bone marrow and then ran the DNA through automated computer systems, comparing it to the 2,500 ethnic groups of the whole human genome from every kind of group and race around the world.
Right.
What happened? Now, this is a high-quality sample. It was done multiple times, like 25 to 50 time read-through, all right? I'm not going to get into all the technical stuff. 91% of the genetic material matches with humans. But remember, 98.4%. Neanderthals, which are not Homo sapiens, they're not human, are 99.5%. This had a 91% match, and it's consistently been that or less in more recent tests. On top of it, when you run a computerized thing like that, the computer is going to try to assume that this is a human, and it's going to try to match things. Now that they're going back, they have found that the areas that would explain for the small stature of the ET,
right,
like, normally dwarfism, although there's no dwarfism where you have a 6-inch 8-year-old or 6-year-old, those are all normal in those areas of the genome. But they have recently just found some genes that seem to be controlling for the small stature, which is unbelievable that it could live 6 to 8 years, only 6 inches big. It is absolutely not a fetus, by the way. The people who have said that just are incompetent quacks.
Right.
So I mean, Dr. Ralph Walkman's report is positive. It's absolutely and by the way, in Barcelona, the head of the X-ray center, Dr. Manchon, when she saw the X-rays immediately and the CAT scan, she says, "This is not a fetus. This is a child that lived a number of years." I mean, she was astonished. She's still looking at this thing going through the CAT scanner at this huge X-ray center in Barcelona. That's only 6 inches. It fits in the palm of my hand, less even. So what we concluded from this, from the DNA, is that now at Stanford, Dr. Nolan has to report that it's human, and that until proven otherwise, because there's no ET database.
Okay,
Right.
ET
DNA. And this has all been done computerized. Now that they're going back more manually, they're finding even more strange things, like the fact that the small stature seems to be explained in a set of genes. And I'm quoting from Dr. Nolan. This is just in the last few hours. days, where he has said that the chances that this is a random mutation are infinitesimally small. In other words, the size of this creature, the symmetry, the 10 ribs, everything, it's reached the point now. So that means if it's not just a one-off mutation, it's an organism. Well, what organism is it? It's 2 arms, 2 legs, a very large head, a very oversized cranium, where the brain would be. And yet it does share a lot of genetic material with humans. Now, much has been made of an allele, what's called a B, as in boy, 2A allele, which would seem to indicate that's in the mitochondrial DNA that the mother would have, that it's linked to, and it was found in the Atacama Desert in Chile, that it would be linked to a Chilean woman. Now it's looking like that's a question. Initially, by the time we finished the film, it was thought to be a male. The last that they know if it's male or female. So here's the problem. If you were to go through the genome, meaning the whole genetic, several billion base pairs of this creature manually, like we did with the human genome, that took 10 years and billions of dollars. Well, we don't have those sort of resources. Dr. Nolan doesn't have those sort of resources. So the genetic information that all the debunkers says, the geneticist is saying it's definitely just a deformed human. Look, he's going to have to say that. Well, let's face it. I mean, he's a mainstream, has 40 PhDs working under him. He's not going to say it's ET. But neither am I. I have never said it's ET. I'm saying this creature is very mysterious. Now you add to this other thing that has happened since the film came out. We've got footage of something that looks very similar to this one that was found in 1996 in Russia, in what was the Soviet Union. And in Russia, the FSB, which had been the KGB, seized it before I could get there. I remember when the case broke and I was asked to try to get there, and it disappeared, but there is video footage that we've gotten. There's another tiny little humanoid that apparently is still in Chile in someone's possession that a researcher who has been down to Chile has told me about. Now, Dr. Nolan and all of us have concluded that if there's more than one of these, it's case closed. It's another organism. But, to really go down there to do a total archaeological expedition, forensic expedition, go into these remote areas with the right equipment, it would be, frankly, millions of dollars, which we don't have. But the evidence that is pouring in the last 6 to 8 months is indicating this is even stranger than we thought it was. And the genetic information is certainly indicating that. And Dr. Lockman's report pretty much was the explosive part of it.
Well,
where he says it's a 6 to 8 year old. You go show me anyone in a neonatal intensive care unit at Cedars-Sinai that can keep a 6-inch live,
exactly,
creature alive for 6 to 8 years. It's not possible.
No, and this is the thing with. Obviously, I haven't seen this in person, but the humanoid in person. But when you look at this, and I am not in any way a doctor of anything, okay? But when you look at this is an obvious, fully developed creature of some kind. Now, you may not want to go out on the limb and say that it is a definitive ET. I understand your position. But when I look at that, those little feet are developed. Those I have 2 daughters, doctor. Okay, I know what they look like when they were 6 months old, 3 months old, and that is not the case. And when you look at this skeleton and you look at the arms, you look at the rib cage, you look at the head, you look at the neck, you look at the feet, you look at the bone structure, and this is a 6-inch humanoid that was walking. This can't be, it's ludicrous to me for somebody to dismiss the obvious. You can go and say DNA this, or I don't want to hear that argument. What I want to hear is tell me how when was the last time you saw somebody 6 inches tall walking on this planet? You haven't seen it. And I just don't want to hear it.
You're not going to. And the other thing, Jimmy, that's really important about this is that when we spoke to the people who've been to that part of Chile, there are reports from really remote areas of seeing only under either moonlight or in darkness these very small creatures walking around. And apparently they can't stand our spectrum, the sun's UV radiation, so they're only seen under low-level light or moonlight. And there have been other reports of these creatures in other parts of the world as well. On top of it, there have been reports of these sort of luminous spherical objects going down into the foothills of the Andes, in the area where where this particular being was found. So this raises all kinds of questions. Now, is it possible that this is this organism, whatever it is, was part human and part something else? Is it something else altogether? We don't know. But the thing that bothers me, and this is where I had a bone to pick with the Huffington Post and Open Minds TV and all that, everyone wants to rush to a conclusion. Here's what it is. It's a deformed human because the geneticist, frankly, is saying that it's a human. He's not going to say humanoid. He's going to say it's a human that's not normal, so it's deformed. But in reality, clinically, and I'm speaking now, I'm putting on my hat as a guy who's delivered a couple hundred babies and have been in emergency deliveries in the ER. The idea in a remote jungle or a remote desert area of the world that was estimated 100 to 200 years ago that this being lived, that it would have been able to be kept alive if it was a grossly deformed human to live and walk around to be 6 to 8 years of age is preposterous. And you can't, if you look at our website and you compare the x-rays and bone densities and the growth plates of a 6 to 8 year old human and this creature, they match. And if you look at the CAT scan, you know it's not a hoax because you can see inside the CAT scan the collapsed lungs and a little place where you can see what's left of the heart right up inside the rib cage.
Right.
Now, I really wanted to try to get a sample of a little bit of that heart muscle because it's another, I won't go and bore you with the science of why we wanted to get that. But this thing is so fragile and so dry and so brittle, I would have destroyed it. And, we just couldn't do it. We would have had, so we settled with taking a couple clippings from the right anterior rib cage.
Concentrate a little bit on the telephone, Doc. I hate to keep going back to that, but you're so excited. Yeah. I can tell that you're moving around a little bit for everybody out there. Anyway, the way that the head and the teeth and everything is represented, and I think you shot it. I would have liked to have seen more in the documentary, by the way, but it is what it is. But the way that you shot it and the way that that I see it, there's, unless it was some sort of monkey or some small creature, but as far as humans go and the way that a baby is developed, the head has got to be on an infant at birth compared to that. What, 50 times the size? I'm just guessing here, but in volume, and the jaw and the teeth structure and the way the nose and the eye, there's nothing that correlates between the two to me. And I just don't understand why somebody can seriously, some type of debunker can look me straight in the eye and tell me that is nothing more than a deformity in a human being. No, I'm not buying that.
Well, no, and I think that it's on the face of it. Everyone who's looked at it, who's a scientist and doctor, has said that. The other thing is that if it was a 15 to 16 week fetus, which is what this size would be, you wouldn't have teeth. The fetuses of that age don't have teeth.
Right. Or toes, or feet, or hands.
Well, no, actually they do.
If
you look at ultrasound.
I mean, a developed foot. I mean, that is just like a little. The best way I can describe it, and it's like a little G.I. Joe doll. It's perfectly proportioned as an adult. It's fascinating to me. And now back to the doctor from Stanford. He did, I believe, didn't he say that the bones were developed as such that this creature walked upright? Didn't he say that?
Absolutely, because the bone density, as well as the growth plates that children have in their long bones, their legs and their arms, wouldn't have been at that level of development if there hadn't been walking activity. In other words, you wouldn't see that in a fetus at all, or a newborn even. So, and he pointed out that it was global, meaning it was symmetrically all throughout the skeleton, that this finding of the bone density and the growth plates, what are called epiphyseal plates, were consistent with a 6 to 8 year old. Now, he didn't say, Dr. Ralph Lockman didn't say it was ET. I haven't said it's ET, and certainly Dr. Nolan is just doing the genetic material. What we do say is that you're talking about thousands of base pairs of DNA that don't match with human. And normally you would just dismiss it if we were just running our own DNA against the library of human genetic material that's in the Human Genome Project. But when you have something like this, you have to look at all of that. But that's what we don't have the resources to do. Dr. Nolan doesn't have the resources to do it either, by the way. If you were to do mouse studies where you would take sections of that DNA and put it into a mouse and see what it actually did, each of those mouse studies at a university costs around $500,000. It's just, we've hit the limit of what we can do. And so I'm very conservative about saying it's still a mystery, but I'm also very firm in saying that people who closed the book and said, oh, it's been figured out. It's like Doug and Dave with the crop circles, these two old geezers who had a board and a string explaining all the crop circles in England. Well, no, actually. Or, Philip Glass explaining every UFO photograph or what have you.
Right.
It just isn't the case. And unfortunately, people want facile, they want quick answers, they want easy answers. And it isn't going to be quick and easy. That's just not the nature of science.
For everybody listening, so you understand exactly what we're talking about, the links to Serious Disclosure are at jimmychurchradio.com. You're there now. You can just go over to the site and go under evidence and look at the pictures that we're talking about. And I was on your site earlier today. By the way, you have a great website. And we work really hard at ours, and I know how much effort is put into an effective site, and you guys do a really good job there. So I know that if you go over and you look at evidence, I think the first drop down there is the humanoid information.
Right, that humanoid, yeah.
Yep.
Sure is.
So, okay, now I wanted to talk about, and again, if you want to stay past 9 o'clock, that's great. Top of the hour, fantastic. I know that you're busy out there, but there's still so much we haven't gotten into. But I mentioned to you earlier today, James Watt from the Reagan administration. And
right.
I think that his quote, and he was busted. He was cold busted. And the thing is one of those rare instances where you really need to explain your way out of this one. Not you, but James Watt. And he had a famous quote, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that he said something to the effect that we don't have to worry about what's going on. I'm paraphrasing here. We don't have to worry about the problems and issues with planet Earth right now because Armageddon is coming soon and the world is going to be smoked, anyway. And again, I'm paraphrasing, but can you elaborate on that a little bit for us? And I just think that it's a very telling statement that he knew something was coming.
Well, it's not even that. It's a worldview, and there are people who think, well, it's the end of the world, and it's always the end of the world. What they don't realize is that it's like it's out the brouhaha about the Mayan calendar. You remember that in 2012, December
yes.
2012?
Right.
It's not the end of the world. It's the end of one era or one large cycle in the development of Earth and the human species, and the opening of another. But how religious folks ended up interpreting that is that it's literally the end of the world. So one of the things that has informed the secrecy is let's just keep all this secret because we're in the end times. It's the end of the world anyway. And why rock the boat? Because it's the end of the world. And therefore, why upset the apple cart with the oil and gas and coal and the economic and the this and the that and the public utilities? because everything's going to come to a crashing end anyway. So what the key thing to understand about that quote is that it informs a certain level of the secrecy, not totally, but in terms of, I've had meetings with folks who say, gosh, if these people know these science and technologies are there that could liberate the human race from the poverty we're facing and the environmental degradation and the poisoning of the oceans and the rivers and the land. And my dad was half Cherokee Indian, and I really got really heavily involved in the whole in Native American view of the sacredness of earth and of nature. And why don't we do something? Why wouldn't they if they know this? I said, yes, but if you believe the world's going to end anyway, why bother? So there is this sort of, it's called eschatology, the study of how the world's going to end. There's sort of an eschatological viewpoint that unfortunately has infected policy. And I was surprised when I met with some scientists and also some military people who shared that viewpoint. And they said, yeah, well, let's not rock the boat because the world's going to come to an end anyway. And, those of us who are connected and rich enough with our flying saucers that Lockheed are making will float off into space, and the rest of the people will just die. I mean, it's this sort of cynical, nasty view amongst some of these uber elites, but some of it is informed by this idea that, so what if 5 billion people die? It's really tragic, and I'm not trying to be flippant about this at all, but I've encountered this over and over and over and over again. But I think it's not that these spiritual or religious teachings are wrong. It's that they've been interpreted incorrectly, just like the whole Mayan calendar, it was this doomsday thing. I'm going, no, it wasn't. And most of the wise elders, by the way, in the Mayan culture said as much. It just means that there's one big era of development and history of human race that's ending, but there's another one opening. So one door is closing while another one opens, and we're walking through this open door into a new future that's really wonderful and beautiful. I mean, imagine this planet and our civilization becoming interstellar, having free energy, so there is no poverty as we know it today. Electromagnetic systems, being able to heal and regenerate bones and spinal cords that are severed. This is actually possible. This is not a pipe dream. Using these very advanced trans-dimensional physics. There's all kinds of things that could happen within a generation once we make it over this hump, as it were. Now, the requirement for that, and I talked to a number of people, I was talking to Paul Hellyer about this, the entry ticket to us becoming interplanetary is that we become what Michikaku calls a type, a level 1 or type 1 planet. We're living together peacefully, and we're no longer at least destroying our own biosphere. We are still a type 0 planet. We're still at the point where we're blowing each other up because of relatively minor differences in race or religion or creed or ethnicity or economic belief systems. Over the last 100 years, remember, we have killed in warfare around 200 million people, which would be the population of an entire planet in many star systems, and was the population of Earth not that many hundreds of years ago. So I think that we have to look at what do we have to do to transition off this misguided idea that the world has to end.
Well,
because I think really
but as I have to just interject, what is it that we have to do? I know you say
do everything.
Go ahead. I'm saying, you say you wonder, and I'm with you, and I'm listening. What is it that we do have to do?
I think the biggest part of the change is in, and I know this sounds a little spiritual, but it's in the level of the consciousness of all of us. We have to, as Einstein said, no problem is ever solved by the level of consciousness that caused it. We have to look and think of things very differently, whether we're looking at each other as humans. And we have to transcend the differences and see that within all intelligent life forms, meaning whether they're human or not human, there's this spark of the sentient conscious mind. And as Erwin Schrödinger said, the father of particle wave theory and modern quantum mechanics, said, the total number of minds in the universe is one. That is, it's a singularity. So there is this, if you will, aspect. That's a deep spirituality that we have to begin to understand, which I just make a distinction between that and different religions that often are in conflict for various social teachings, but this deep understanding of who we are, the light of consciousness, the light of conscious intelligence, and that is really is a singularity, that in that we can all be one, and begin to operate as if that is the case, because it is the case. And I think that then will inform what we do with each other, with technologies, with science, with disclosure. So the big change I think that has to happen is within ourselves.
Before, and again, if you want to stay with us, let's keep the conversation going. But there's a few things that I need to get out there. One of them is you and I were talking about ancient aliens, and I know that you're on you've always been on the show, but you've just shot next season 2 as well. So we're excited about that. I am. And I've had, those guys on this show too as well. Now, my take is this, and then I want to hear your take. My take is this. The Earth is a little bit too old. That's the first thing. It's just too old. We're talking 4.5 billion years old. And so the thought of somebody not cruising by at least once just to do a drive-by, that hasn't happened is ludicrous. That's just it's an insane thought. And when you think about our research now and the way that we are able to detect planets with our own little primitive technology that we have, our little backward self, we're able to detect planets. So the fact that in the opposite sense, we have been detected, surely that's an obvious thing. But I do believe that we have been visited at least a couple of times now in the distant past. Does it happen on a daily basis today? I would like to think that it does. I know that I firmly believe they know we're here, period. That's
absolutely.
it.
Absolutely.
It's the end of the discussion.
Yeah, you're right. I have no doubt about it. And it's interesting because one of the men I've worked with who is wanting to help us with the energy development work, who has worked for years under contract with IT&T, and from that the CIA. It's IT&T's the cutout corporation. He frequently has had, over the course of his career, devices brought to him that are parts of machines and very old things that are in the hundreds of thousands of years old, thousands to hundreds of thousands of years old, that have been pulled up off the bottom of the ocean or been found underground. And his task has been to figure out what they might have done, what kind of purpose this device would have had. Now, it's very classified stuff. I know this man. He stayed at my home. I've been down to his lab near the Huntsville Space Flight Center and the Redstone Arsenal in Alabama.
Right.
But what I found in talking to people like him is that it's kind of an open secret in those circles that the world has had intelligent life way before the time we think, and even human civilizations that have come and gone way before what we realize of the last 10,000 years, but that there has been contact and involvement with the development of Earth and perhaps Homo sapiens over many, at least a million, 2 million years, from involvement and contact with extraterrestrial life forms. So one of the things that these scientists will tell me when they're looking at these materials is that it's kind of like, yeah, doesn't everyone know that? But it's interesting. This gets back to this whole paradigm issue. I was talking to a man who worked at Jet Propulsion Labs. I could not convince him to go public as a disclosure project witness, but he had worked on some of the imaging of the structures on Mars. And he says, that's not a myth. There are artificials on the moon and on Mars, but they're so old. I mean, and he indicated millions of years old in the case of Mars. He says, but the shape of them being obelisks, like the Washington Monument, of one huge piece of stone, like the ones that are in Egypt, and the pyramid-shaped objects and other structures. he says it would be an obvious connection with early human civilization. And I said, well, why don't you bring that out? Because it's something old. It wouldn't rock the boat like a current operating UFO technology. He says, no, you don't understand. If that information came out, it would collapse the orthodox belief systems of every orthodox and fundamentalist religion on earth. And I said, well, that's fine. It's just an evolution. He says, no, you don't understand how powerful those groups are. Now, this is a jet propulsion lab scientist, not a theologian telling me this. It's very interesting.
What was and I'm going to get back to that thought. I'm going to finish that for you in a second. But what was the device that do they know what the technology was and how old it was? I mean, what it was used for? Describe. Just saying device to me is not good enough, Dr. Greer. What was it?
Well, in other words, I mean, if they would find, under the ocean or in the ground, some very, very old metallic alloy, obviously manufactured item that was hundreds of thousands of years old.
Right.
And that's what they were finding. And some of them were very small parts, some were bigger. And this man had been involved, amongst other things, in studying what they might be able to do. The man is truly an electromagnetics genius, an engineering genius.
Mm-hmm.
So, kind of like Nikola Tesla was, but, 100 years later. And I think that what you realize, and when you talk to people like that, it's not just this isn't one or two things that have happened, but that there have been a number of cases where these sort of artifacts have been found. Now they get hoovered up by the intelligence community because, again, they don't want people to know this stuff. So I think there's a whole sort of forbidden archaeology and an ancient history of Earth and even humanity that just shakes the paradigm of the conventional wisdom too much, just like the technological and macroeconomic part of the modern UFO material does. And I think it's all part of an ongoing myth and set of deceptions that need to be addressed. Now, my main concern is the now and the future, but certainly in my career over the last 20 years being involved with this and meeting with people like this from very deep inside covert programs, it's clear to me that there's an ancient connection between Earth and other civilizations. And if you look at the Native American and other Native peoples around the world, these sort of accounts are all throughout. In Africa, some of the tribes feel that they actually came from Sirius. The Cherokee feel that and by the way, Shenandoah means daughter of the stars or daughter from the stars.
That's right.
So there are these sort of stories that go throughout traditions all over the world. And I think that they're based in some fact, although they may have been embellished and mythologized over the centuries or thousands of years. But they're at the core of it, I think there is something there. Now, that's less clear than a modern daytime UFO photograph or video or a military person like we have on our website talking about what they've handled and seen. But it's still very important because I think we have to understand our past and maybe ask the question, why have our origins and our past also been kept secret? What are they trying to hide? What are they afraid of that we might realize who we really are? And I think when the day is done, we're going to realize that we're all cosmic beings.
I have said so many. This is I have one or two missions in life, and one of them is I firmly believe that we have a gap between 12,000 years ago and 5,000 years ago. This big, empty, dark ages. I wish that there was my brain was connected right now to my jaw, but there's this vast gap that is there where the orthodoxy wants you to accept that just one day we went from clubbing our wives in the head with a club and out there in animal skins to megalithic structures and the knowledge to build the pyramids, that this happened overnight. Right. And I just, I have a heart. So I am going to get the answers that I need to be satisfied. Right now, the textbooks say it just happened. Accept it. I'm going to get to the bottom of that. I want your opinion on that. And the second thing is this, and I would like your opinion, is I feel that the mass hysteria, anarchy, lawlessness in the street, religion's collapse attitude that is out there, I think it would be the exact opposite. And the reason, and the reason for that is with the disinformation and misinformation and everything else that they've pumped out at us, and Hollywood with all of their E.T., Prometheus type movies, Transformers, whatever, that we would not be surprised. It just wouldn't, and it's information that we're asking for. And if we get that information, we can just put it to bed and we can move on because the question is answered. This whole thing about religions collapsing and government and turmoil, no, I think it would be exactly 180 degrees in the opposite direction.
But I remember, it's a whole divide and conquer mentality. You know, people who want to maintain control often demagogue issues to divide people, because if they can stay divided and in fear, then the people who are despotic can remain in power.
Exactly.
And that's true of whether it was ancient Rome or whether it's true of what's going on in the world today. Mm-hmm. And I think when people realize that there's this connection that we have with each other that is deep and truly spiritual, but also with these other civilizations that's very ancient, people are going to realize we have more in common than we have in difference. But then how do you explain spending $1 trillion or more a year on warfare and armaments if peace breaks out? You know, I had someone once at the Pentagon say, heaven forbid the peace should break out, we'd all be out of business.
Right.
So, you know, it's not that there aren't proclivities of humans to divide and conquer, but that proclivity ends up being exacerbated deliberately by the controllers and people who want to demagogue one issue or another to divide people. And I've seen it happen on the UFO subject and in the UFO subculture, frankly. And I think that's what has happened with organized religion, with big political systems. It's this tendency to want to do that. And I think that if the truth were known about all of this, people would come together and not, as Reagan suggested, that we unite against a common alien threat, like he said at the United Nations, but that we unite in peace on this planet and that we enter an era of interplanetary contact and interplanetary peace. So I think that that's the big next chapter after 2012, if you want to look at the Mayan calendar. That is the challenge before us, and that's what we have to work towards in many different avenues. And people all over the world of goodwill are working towards that. But there are always these other interests who want to keep people in fear and divided, because if people are afraid, you can control them. And look what happened after 9/11. I mean, the Patriot Act, things were pushed through that they could have never gotten through
ever
without people being in absolute fear and terror. So, you know, fear is the mind killer. And people take leave of their senses and go to this dark place in fear and insecurity. And that's one of my big concerns when I wrote the paper, When Disclosure Serves Secrecy. It was this, you know, thing that was warned to me years ago by some senior people in this so-called majestic, this cabal that runs all this, who said, look, that's the real thing that eventually they're going to want to pop on the public. They're going to want to present that there's a threat out there. And let's not just unite the West against something, against the East. Let's unite the whole human race against a threat from outer space, which is exactly what Werner von Braun and others have warned us about. And I think that's why we have to sit back and say, how much of the information that we're getting is spun by these controllers to manipulate people into fear and hatred, which has been the bane of human existence, and the way that despotic people have controlled the masses for thousands of years. We have to change the way we're living fundamentally on this planet if we're going to survive.
How do you explain, and this is, you started to touch upon that, how do you explain the success of programs like Ancient Aliens today? I'm not too sure if even with von Daniken's work and the hysteria that his books created in 1970 and the original Gods movie. But how do you explain what are we on 7 seasons now of Ancient Aliens? How do you explain that type of success?
I think it's because it's resonating with something that people deep inside know must be true, that we're not alone and that we've never been alone, and that there's an ancient history that's sort of a forbidden history of our civilization, of the human race, that has been topic non grata. You just can't talk about it.
Right.
And I think people instinctively feel that's true, that there's something missing, this missing gap you're talking about. There's a link missing, and people are eager to learn about that. And I think that's why this whole subject has such high interest, not just Ancient Aliens part, but the part that we're being visited currently, that there's intelligence. Now, they just came out with the Kepler Space Telescope that there are estimated 11 billion Earth-like planets in our own Milky Way galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
And our Milky Way galaxy is just one of billions of galaxies. So, people increasingly are coming around to the understanding that, wow, the universe is teeming with intelligent life in all likelihood. And what does that mean for us, and what does it mean for our future? And I think a lot of people who, I had one of Bush's, sort of the consigliere for Bush's nuclear and energy policy that I met with a few years ago, and we were at the University Club up in the White House in Washington, and this was an old guy, an old Harvard Law Review guy, and we were talking. He says, look, it was very funny. He says, Dr. Greer, what you've got to understand is that anyone who gets into that house, and he points down the road to the White House, he says, I don't care if they're liberal, conservative, socialist, libertarian, when they get into that building, they're going to govern in a conservative way, not meaning Republican or Democrat, but in a conservative, in the truest sense of the way, don't rock the boat. Why? Because no one in that position wants to manage that big of a change. And I said, yes, sir, I understand that. I said, I had an admiral tell me once, who was the guy who was in charge of CONUS, the Continental United States Security.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, yes, everything you're saying is true, but it's too big of a thing for me to manage. I just want to get out of this command and retire and go fishing at my place in Montana. So I think that people have to understand that there is this tendency for people in powerful positions, and it's sort of I call this the banality of evil, to just let things be like they are because they don't want to rock the boat too much. But one thing I pointed out to this advisor for Bush was that, yes, but staying where we are is that we're headed on a trajectory of complete social and environmental, geophysical, and energy meltdown in our lifetimes. And I said, it isn't like running around the 1800s with muskets and what have you. I said, we have got to deal with these issues, and kicking the can down the road, which is what Washington likes to do.
Right.
He just won't do. He said, yes. But he says, but the truth is, he says, good luck with what you're doing. The people who are in powerful positions, they don't want to be managing something that is that much change. So that's why, if you look at big change in history, Jimmy, over the last few thousand years, whether it's the Roman Empire or what have you, the changes that happen, the early Christian era, they all come out from the side, not from the centers of power, not from the wealthy, not from the elite. It comes from a beginning of people out there that then catches on, and it becomes something that changes the course of history in the human race. And I think one of the mistakes people frequently make when they ask me about Disclosure Project, they say, when is disclosure going to happen? I said, well, we're doing it. And they don't understand what I mean. And I said, we're doing it. We're identifying people to come forward. We're educating each other and our leaders. I mean, they're humans too, even if they are members of Congress. And so, I said, that's why we have to do it. And I said, I think it's a mistake for us to wait for the president to act, or the Congress to act, or the UN to act, or big corporations or Silicon Valley to bring up these technologies. I think the people who know about this need to come together, and create this movement of change. And that's how all evolution, some would say revolutions, have happened. And this can be a peaceful revolution, but that's how it happens. It's very unusual that happens from the center of power.
Did you get Stephen Bassett's release that he sent out today from PRG?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so now it's March 31st is the date, I guess?
Yes, and, I've been, Bassett was introduced to all this by me back in the early 2000s, and one of the things that I've always consistently done, a lot of people don't know this, if you look, we have a 2-hour DVD you can get on our website with, I don't know, a few dozen of these top secret military people, and in it is about a 500-page presidential briefing document. Every single member of the Senate and House, back when we launched the disclosure movement in 2001, had that hand delivered to them. I personally gave it to many of them. I mean, Ted Kennedy took one and walked off with it, because we were there with him. So we have been doing that educational effort, and it needs to continue. Well, I'm saying, this is not to say that shouldn't be done, and that we shouldn't hold our representatives accountable for dealing with this issue. I'm just saying that don't put all your eggs in that basket. Be sure that you understand that really disclosure, contact, and bringing out these technologies, that's primarily going to be done by us. It isn't going to just be we're not going to hand off this football to the Senate Intelligence Committee and they're going to take care of it. That's the least likely way this is going to happen.
Right. Well, it's got to happen on multiple fronts at all of and continue. You've got to keep your foot on the gas, but you run into a dangerous situation if you don't do it. If you like SETI, not CSETI. Let's talk about SETI for a second. I've had people come on this show that just think that is an awful waste of money and time. We should put that money somewhere else. And my argument, if you don't do it, if you don't put the effort out there, then you definitely, the worst happens. You don't know anything. So you have to, and what Stephen Bassett is doing, and I've got to say, he's a man on a mission, just like yourself. And if he doesn't do it, then you know what? Then what do we have? We have nothing. And it's the same thing with you. If and your mission, if you don't keep your foot on the gas, and if we don't try, then what do we have? Nothing.
Well, that was the hard choice. I remember in 1994, I had met with the crown prince of a country in Europe. I don't want to go into it. And I was so depressed after the meeting, and so many horrible things were going on in my life, and dealing with this issue. And there was so much stress that I vowed that in 1994 I was going to get out of all this, and I was going to just shut it down. And yet, and then I would say, well, I have to tell you, this has been the hardest thing. The worst day in the ER when a 3-year-old boy had died in my arms because we couldn't resuscitate him was not as stressful as this has been, to be honest. I mean, I kind of talk about it in a way but personally, it's been very, very difficult, most difficult thing I've ever done. And I think that that's part of the backstory that, someday might be told. But I think that that's what you're saying is true. You can't give up. I remember when Edgar Mitchell turned to me when we had our first gathering in California at Asilomar of cosmonauts and astronauts and military witnesses to this. And Edgar Mitchell turned and pulled me aside at one point. He says, Dr. Greer, you just have to put one foot in front of the other and don't give up and never look back and keep, because it's that kind of task. It's very, very difficult. And, it's, there's the frustrations are huge, frankly. But it has to be done. And so that's why we need more people, like you're saying, going out there and doing it. Now, like Paula Harris has done a great job helping do this throughout Europe. And there's so many wonderful people around the world working on this. And I think that, what we have to do is keep that going, but we need to come together more as people who are interested in this need to sort of walk the talk more. And it's easy to be entertained by this subject. It's very hard to do anything about it. But once you start doing something about it, it's actually kind of exciting exciting and fun. I mean, even going out under the stars with a group of people using these contact protocols, and suddenly something appears and floats over the group and then dematerializes. Wow. I mean, people live their whole lives to see something like that.
Right.
And now we have thousands of teams out there doing it. So I tell people, you know, get off the smartphone and out from in front of the computer some, and turn off the TV and go out and do something, you know. And it's actually really exciting. And I think when people do it together, it's easier than trying to do it alone, and to join with other people. By the way, we're about to come out with a free app so that everyone who is a CE5 ambassador, meaning close encounter of the fifth kind ambassador, who goes out and attempts to make contact, will be able to connect to everyone else in their community on a free app. That'll be kind of like a GPS. Your smartphone will just hook you up, and you'll be able to see who's in your area. We're putting the finishing touches on that, so stay tuned. And people who want to be part of that, you can get our newsletters and everything for free. Just put your email address in it on our website at curiousdisclosure.com, and we'll notify you when that's finished. But I have a beta test version on my smartphone right now, and it's really cool. It'll be great for people who want to do this and go out under the stars and connect with each other in different communities. And it'll be global. You can be, if you travel to Malaysia and want to meet up with someone, you'll be able to use it there.
And for everybody, just again, the links are there at jimmychurchradio.com. You can go straight over to Serious Disclosure. And if my memory serves, there is a CE5 tab right on the top of the page. So what's coming up in the next, you're one of the busiest guys. You're literally, for lack of a better term, you're one of the rock stars of this industry, and people really look forward and listen to everything that, and they hang on your every word like I did tonight. What are your plans for the year? I know you're booked up constantly, but what's going on?
Well, the big thing, one is this app. The other is that we're going to take an expedition that's a training expedition for people for a whole week up in the mountains outside Tucson. I mentioned this earlier, where we go out every night out under the stars as a team. So people who want to sign up for that information's up on our website now. We're going to do that a few times through the year. We're continuing this briefing process. I mean, I can't, with some of these world leaders who have surfaced in the last 5-6 months since Sirius, last 5 months since Sirius, the film came out. And I'm actually down here in Florida talking to a New York Times best-selling author who wants to work on a follow-on feature film about this subject that would educate, even millions more people. So we're looking at putting that together, and then we're also looking at very eagerly with hoping to get the resources in place to develop the new energy. We haven't talked about that, but one of the purposes of the entire serious film movement is to get the awareness out there, but then also get the funding in place so we can have sort of a civilian version of the Lockheed Skunk Works, where we develop these technologies, but the development would be streamed online on Ustream or something. And my view of this is that anyone listening who knows about these technologies, if you've got something operational, do not patent it. Do not keep it secret. Get it into multiple hands and get it out there as fast as you can. There's no way to do this in the normal intellectual property technology world. These technologies need to get out. They need to get out quickly. So what I want to do is develop an open source research and development lab with some of these brilliant people I've met over the years, and just basically bypass the big aerospace and governmental entities and bring this technology out, but to do it with the full participation of the public, meaning, as soon as we have a eureka moment on a technology, it's seen by everyone on the internet, the technology is dispersed, multiple centers around the world reproduce it, and it begins to come out in some form. So my view of this over the last 10, 15 years has reached the conclusion that that's about the only way you can do this. If you try to do it the way inventors have done it over the last 50 to 100 years, you're going to end up dead like Stan Meyer or die a bitter man like Nikola Tesla. We have to learn from history if we're not going to repeat it. So that's a big project we're launching also.
This question just came in right now, so I'm going to sneak this into you because it's actually this is a listener that's listening in real time. Our planet is dying. Dr. Greer's associates have not yet been able to duplicate the work of Tesla and others in creating zero-point energy devices. I don't agree with that, but in order to help humanity save our planet, why don't the ETs simply communicate telepathically or through dreams to scientists and engineers on how to develop these free energy systems?
Well, again, that question assumes a fact, not an evidence, to use a legal term. That has happened. Let me give you one example. There's a scientist I know, brilliant guy, an engineer. Back in the 70s, he developed exactly a device and did have these kinds of experiences with ETs, where he got inspired. In fact, when he would be working on a technology, if he was getting something wrong, one would kind of phase in and materialize and move an instrument to show him and then disappear. Now, this is a true story, and the guy is very credible. It sounds science fiction. As soon as he got something operational, he wasn't even going through the patent route. There was a knock on the door. Some goons showed up with a national security order. They seized the technology, and they told him, you're working for us now, or you're not going to work for anybody. Now, he had his own company dealing. This was 40 years ago. Mm-hmm. I know this person very, very well. So, see, that in and of itself isn't the answer. It's also the strategic matrix, the strategic security you put around. A lot of people say, how have I gotten this far and lived to tell the tale? Well, it's been hard, but it's also because you put things in place where it becomes very difficult if something happens. The secrecy that usually surrounds doing a technology like this, which is normal, inventors want to keep it secret. They want to get their patent. They want to patent it. They want to do all the conventional stuff. They want to get venture capital that they attract. Unfortunately, the system is set up so that if you go that route, you're a dead man walking, or you're doomed to fail. You know, the Federation of American Science, this report is up on our website. 3 years ago, in 2010, in the fall of 2010, said that there are 5,135 patents that have been seized under the national security orders. At least that number. Now, these are things that went to patent, and many of them are energy related. One of them that they cite was just a very super efficient solar photovoltaic generator that in 1974 would have been the most efficient thing on the market, and they seized it because it would have competed with the price point of coal and oil back then, 40 years ago. So you can't, if you try to do these technologies, if an ET lands and hands you something and you try to bring it through the system the way people normally do, and this is the normal, customary business and legal model for a new technology, you will fail. I can't say it with enough emphasis. So you got to do it through this other strategy, but you've also got to find people who have the courage who will follow through. For example, we had a man who had this level of information under contract, and we were funding him to do it. He had a former CIA director go down to where he was working, threaten him and his family, and he disappeared. Why? Because at that point, we didn't have the funds to have everyone together and the security in place. And he was just sort of a lone wolf working on his own. We will never do that again because it's too risky. Recently, I was contacted by a man in the United Kingdom who is working with a group that has basically reproduced what Stan Meyer had, which had a car running on water.
Right.
And they're getting death threats now. And he's saying, my God, what are we going to do? I said, you squeeze the toothpaste out of the tube so fast that no one can put it back in. He says, what do you mean? And I described the strategy. Get it out. But see, they want to keep the secret. They want to do things in a way that are the conventional way. And they think that, they'll move to somewhere else where they can have better security. I said, where on planet Earth are you going to go?
Right.
Where these goons aren't going to find you. So we put together, and this is actually on the section of our site under the Orion Project, a whole strategic plan that is kind of long to read, but anyone who wants to read it can read it. It's up there for anyone to see. That's sort of a tutorial of how to do this. And, people can take my advice or not. It's a free world. But I think that if you do it the way most people have tried to do it in the past, you're going to fail. And this is why we want to do it this other way, where we have a research facility funded properly. The people are there working. Everything is streamed onto the internet. Everything is shared. That's a successful outcome, literally in real time, without concern for intellectual property and without concern for the patent route, or keeping it secret or worrying about the venture capital people. Because if the damn thing works, it's going to get out there. But if it's strangled in the cradle, the way Stan Meyer's stuff was strangled, or this other scientist who now works for some three-letter agencies, stuff was strangled, then we're going to be in the same mess that we've been in for almost 100 years. And remember, Faraday, there were all kinds of breakthroughs in the late 1800s, early 1900s on this issue of a 0 point. They didn't call it that. But even T. Townsend Brown had a high voltage electromagnetic crystalline structures that would levitate in the late 20s.
That's right.
And so that is absolutely true.
Mm-hmm.
So here we are, 50 to 100 years later, spoiling our nest, and the planet's dying. And again, half the population of the planet is in horrible poverty. So as a compassionate thing, we have to do this, but we have to do it wisely. And what hasn't happened is that the strategic knowledge that I've learned the very, very, very hard way, if you read between the lines of what I've been sharing tonight, has to be incorporated. Whoever wants to work on this, and I'm a doctor. I'm not an engineer, and I'm not a physicist. But if you're going to do it, you better, strategically think this through and not make the mistakes that have been made over the last 100 years.
Well, I'm going to thank you first off for sharing and extending another half hour, because I know your schedule is such that I just want to say thank you first off.
Well, you're welcome. It's been great speaking with you. Yeah.
But second, how do I get rid of this cold?
Get plenty of rest. I think some zinc and vitamin C and plenty of fluids, and it'll run its course with just some rest. And these viruses, this time of year is terrible. And
I need the secret. You don't have the secret. You doctors don't have
the common cold. Actually, probably these advanced electromagnetic systems would fix that. One of the things I've always joked about, I'm a doctor, and I haven't been focusing on electromagnetic medicine, but I can tell you that the same thing that allows something to go from one star system to another applied into a healing system, we could probably heal every disease that we have on this planet. But one of the things I say to people, if the planet dies, it doesn't matter if we cure a few diseases that are afflicting humanity. We have to triage this, to use a good ER doc's concept. And the first thing we have to do is fix this larger problem, because we really are killing Gaia, the Earth. The Earth Mother is being destroyed by how stupidly we're living on her, and it's completely fixable. This is, it's a solvable problem, but it can't be solved by one person, and it's got to be done by a lot of people who understand the implications and how to do it well. And that's, all I can do. At this point, I'm getting up there in years, and I have 7 grandchildren. The 7th one just born 2 weeks ago tonight. And, I just think, I have to do what I can do, but it's going to take a lot of people working together.
Well, you're in great shape, by the way. You look good. I mean, I had no idea nobody would think that you had 7 grandchildren. And
I know. I still bench 410 pounds. Yeah. I love working out.
There's a scene for everybody out there. When you watch Sirius for the first time, just remember, plug this into the front of your brain. The opening scene of the movie is you walking out on stage, right? And a true electric moment with the crowd and everything. But your shoulders with the camera from behind you, man,
It's my own little It's my stress management program, to be honest with you. It's how I manage the stress.
I'm not making light of it, man. I mean, you're in really great shape. Okay. I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna leave with this. There's a quote that I read with you years ago, and it's always stuck with me and resonated with me. So I just want to. I'm just going to read this quote because I think it's great. It is. And I quote, "My meetings over the last 9 years with covert operatives who have worked on UFO-related programs have introduced me to some characters right out of a spy novel and then some." End quote. I'm a jealous guy, Dr. Greer. You've lived a great life. And thanks
we'll trade places maybe at some point. I think I could do with a little less excitement, but I hope you feel better. And thank you so much for your interest and help.
I appreciate everything. I'll be in contact next week. Let's do it again. You have an open invitation here on the show. And again, thank you. Be safe out there and stay warm down there in Florida.
All right. Thank you. Good night.
You too. Good night. All right. Dr. Greer, thank you for coming on the show. We did an extra half hour there. And again, the phones were lighting up all night long. The phone lines are open. I've got a bunch of other stuff that I need to get to tonight, too, and get out of the way. I'm going to do that. This is Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. We are on the Dark Matter Radio Network. Going to take a quick break because I just talked for a straight 2.5 hours. Going to take a quick break. Keep the emails coming. Follow us on Twitter. Do everything that you've got to do. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church, and I'm going to stretch my legs, take a couple minutes, and I'll be back after this. Don't go anywhere. KJCR.
Way out here, we listen to Jimmy Church on the Dark Matter Radio Network.
Dark Matter.
Dark Matter. Dark Matter. Dark Matter. Dark Matter.
You're listening to Fade to Black
on the Dark Matter Radio Network.
¿Qué tal, mis amigos? Yo soy Mario Carson, el tiburón, y los invito para que escuchen a mi buen amigo Jimmy Church Radio. ¡Claro que sí!
Oi, I'm Reese Evans. You're listening to Jimmy Church. This is Revolution. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution is on radio. Ciao.
All right, everybody, welcome back. Fade to Black on the Dark Matter Radio Network. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Keep the emails coming. Jimmy@jimmychurchradio.com. Follow us on Twitter @JChurchRadio. Phone lines are now open. I'm sorry I didn't get to any calls. I just wanted to keep the conversation flowing, but the phone lines are now open. 323. We'll see if we can. 323-825-5045 is the number. We'll see if we can get a couple of calls in before the show ends tonight. I do have a couple of thoughts that I want to get out there. So we'll get to that. And again, 323-825-5045. And we'll see if we can squeeze in a couple of calls. If let's see. Yeah, we've got two more segments left. And I wanted to talk about a couple of things that directly reference to, and I didn't want to talk about this with Dr. Greer directly because I knew that I wanted to get this in tonight. But have you ever thought, now think about this. Have you ever thought what Earth looks like from space? Think about this. we always have thought about it as the blue planet. Mars is red, Jupiter is big, Saturn has rings, Earth is blue. But that's really not the case. Earth is lit up and has been for a long time. And what I am referring to is intelligence. Going back thousands of years, cities, campfires, lit windows, civilization gathering, technology is advancing. And so if you did a drive-by on planet Earth, and we were talking about that a little bit ago, but if you did a drive-by a couple of thousand years ago, certainly there was life and you saw things. Now, if you drove by Earth in the last 100 years, it's lit up like a Christmas tree. And that is what you need to think about. That is the concept. When you cruise by Earth now, when you drive by Mars and you look out the window, or Jupiter or anything else, there's no life there. There is nothing lighting up that planet. But Earth, you drive by Earth and it is lit up. Now, take this concept one step further. If that's the way that we look, we're looking out to the stars constantly now. And I read a report yesterday, a story, that there are now billions of Earth-like planets out there. And if you take that statement and you go back 5 years. Do you remember what those reports? Oh, we found our first Earth-like planet. First. Oh, there might be 2. There might be 3. Now, today, with the searching that's going on with the deep space satellites and the telescopes and the computer programs that read planets that are circulating suns and the breaking up of the light, and now we can analyze things thousands of times a second, and we're able to compute and find. I get that, but why can't we detect planets that have light on it? Like Earth. That's my point. Think about that. Here in our own solar system, it is rather obvious when we look at these 9 planets that are orbiting the sun here. There is one with life on it, and you can see that easily. Why isn't that something that is at least spoken about as a possibility for detecting when we're looking at all of these other planets? That's something that makes those planets just a little bit different. And that is there's light coming back off of that planet. There's a distinct difference between Earth and Mars. And, you know, if you're on the space shuttle and you're cruising around in orbit around Earth, it's lit up. You see the cities. You see the life. You see intelligent life. Why isn't that research being done to the heavens? I don't understand it. And it seems simple to me. Now, and I started to talk about this with Dr. Greer, to think that driving by this planet, you just, again, for the lack of a better way of putting, looking out the window, you can just look at, you don't have to send a space probe down here. You don't have to send a lunar rover down to planet Earth to look for life. You just drive by and look out the window and it's there. It's obvious. Why? To think that they don't know that we're here is insane. It's simple, and they do know, because all they got to do is look out the solar window across the universe. with our little, and I said this earlier to Dr. Greer, with our little minds that we have today, Michio Kaku's way of putting it, we're a zero. Our little minds, we are able to now detect planets. Now, don't you think that they know we're here? If we know those planets are out there, there's a way. And that technology is there. And they do know that we are here. There is no way that they don't. And that it may be my opinion, but I know that I'm right. This is Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church, on the Dark Matter Radio Network. Stay with us. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, I've got some more thoughts and take your calls. Be back in a second. Stay with us.
Hi everybody, this is Rob Halford, the Metal Guard on JimmyChurchRadio.com.
What's up? My name's Brian Taylor, Ninja Badass Extraordinaire, and this is JimmyChurchRadio.com.
JJZR in your face.
JimmyChurchRadio.com on the Dark Matter Radio Network.
All right, everybody, welcome back. Oh, what you guys don't know, I'm fighting a cold, and if you can't hear it in my voice, I'm fighting a cold. So with Dr. Greer, as we're doing the interview, I can mute the microphone and go and sneeze and cough and do everything that I have to do. Now it's just me, and I'm doing everything I can to act like I'm healthy. But yeah, I am really fighting it tonight. I'm going to take as many breaks as I can so you don't hear me sneeze on the air or hitting the cough button. It is just so embarrassing. All right, shoot me an email to Jimmy@JimmyChurchRadio.com. This is a privilege to be here in this chair speaking to everyone out there. And this week on the show, tonight was Dr. Greer. I apologize for the audio, by the way, but look, he's on the road. He's only got access to a cell phone. It is just the way that it is. There's nothing I can do about that, but you know what? It's live radio, and the show must go on. I might get a little grief for it, but you know what? It's just too important to have, when you have the opportunity to have a guest like that, the show, you just run with it. I apologize. Tomorrow night, we will have on Philip Mantle, live from the UK. Editor of UFO Today magazine, author, broadcaster, filmmaker, and on Friday, to top off this week that we've had here on the show, is Leslie Keene. And I have said from the beginning on this show that I will only have the best of the best on this show. I want everybody to come here and learn something. And to have a guest like Dr. Greer, for me, or tomorrow night, Philip Mantle, or you think about what has happened every night on this show, I am so excited to present it. And this is the week on this show. Are you kidding me? It doesn't get any better than that. Shoot me an email, Jimmy@JimmyChurchRadio.com. Follow us on Twitter @JChurchRadio. Oh, by the way, everything... all of the shows are archived on JimmyChurchRadio.com. You go to the highlights page, and as we post everything up to YouTube, everything is archived. If it's not on the highlights page, go to the YouTube channel, which is Fade to Black. I think it's Fade to Black. Just go there. Everything is there. If you've missed a show, you only caught part of a show, everything is over on YouTube. Subscribe. If you subscribe to the channel, then when the new shows get posted, you'll be notified, and that's always a good way to go. And okay, so now, I wanted to talk about, I've only got a little bit of time left, and I wanted to get a couple of thoughts out. Earlier this week on space.com, there was an article, and this is what it was called, and this is so frustrating to me. Ancient Mars may have been habitable for hundreds of millions of years. Article continues and says, NASA's Opportunity rover, which celebrates 10 years of Mars exploration on Friday, January 24th, has uncovered evidence that benign, nearly neutral pH water flowed on the red planet about 4 billion years ago. The Curiosity rover discovered a potentially habitable lake and groundwater system in a different Martian locale dating from about 3.7 billion years ago. Now, this is the thing, and I just don't understand the amount of money that we have spent sending these rovers up to Mars, coming back with useless information. Useless. I don't understand why we don't send up a rover that literally shovels into the ground, that goes to where the ice caps are, check out the ice, go to where the information is, and come back with some real news. I know that Mars was probably habitable 3.7 billion years ago. I don't need that report. I want real information. I don't get it. Where we send up a rover that's drilling in, a half inch into some rock and is coming back with, that's just, it's useless. It's useless to NASA. It's useless to science. Why aren't we getting real information? Why isn't a rover going up there and doing something for real? I don't understand it. And then this week, on top of all of that information, then NASA comes out this week, and I know you saw the report. NASA is baffled by a piece of rock that mysteriously appeared in front of the Mars Opportunity rover. I've seen the photographs, and I had said earlier, I said last week it was Photoshopped. I was joking, but obviously a rock just appears, and they don't have an answer for it. And I just don't get it. And they want to come back with useless information. Now, this is either big news or it's nothing. And I'm talking about the rock. But why can't we pick up that rock? How did it get there? Where did it come from? Was it in the middle of a storm? Did somebody throw it at the rover? Did it tumble down a hill? It seems to me like it could be potentially some of the biggest news to come off of Mars in a long time. And that's the information that they give us. I don't understand why we don't have some technology up there that is real, that we can actually do some real investigating up in Mars. I don't understand why we have backhoes on Bobcats driving all over this country. You can go and rent it and go dig up your backyard. Why aren't we flying that to Mars? I want to see a backhoe on one of these rovers where we can dig up and actually analyze something and come back with some real information. And you know what? I know that the emails, oh, Jimmy, we've figured out so much. You know what? We haven't figured out anything about Mars, and it's right there. And to get this kind of stuff coming in, I just find it useless and a terrible, terrible waste of money. Shoot me an email. Disagree. You know I'm right. This is JimmyChurchRadio.com. I'm going to take one more break, and we'll be back to close out the show in just a second. Got a couple more thoughts. I got to air some dirty laundry. I'll be back in a second. Stay with us.
And I listen to JimmyChurchRadio.com.
Jimmy Church. My name is Alan, and I listen to JimmyChurchRadio.com.
He's always giving it to you straight.
JimmyChurchRadio.com. On the Dark Matter Radio Network.
Hi, this is Rob Reiner from Anvil, and you're listening to JimmyChurchRadio.com.
What's up? I'm Chris.
What up? This is Kyle Massey, and you're listening to Jimmy Church Radio, the revolution.
Oh, yeah. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. You are here to learn something. That's why you come into this show. I'm here to teach you something. When I started off in my little broadcast career years ago, one of the things I had decided then was I was going to teach. There is a reason why you are here. The same reason why I was listening to radio. This is KJCR, by the way, on the Dark Matter Radio Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. I am here to educate. I went to radio to learn something. And one of the things that has really been bothering me lately is the preponderance of hoaxes on the internet, fabricated stories, created for clicks, for money. And this week, 500,000 people in Europe believed a microchipping hoax story. And if you haven't read it, I'll tell you where you can go read it in a second. But you want to go to Snopes.com, Snopes, Snopes.com. You've got the links up on JimmyChurchRadio.com. Go to JimmyChurchRadio.com. It's all there. A top information post website recently published a fear-mongering article. When I say fear-mongering, this is what the story, the title, the headline of the story was. And I quote here, "All European newborn babies will be microchipped after May 2014, end quote. Now, imagine for a second, you're a parent, you've got your wife is pregnant, and you read this headline. Think about that. And it was completely fabricated, done in jest, done for clicks. Now, the article itself, and when you go and read it, it's just 4 little teeny tiny paragraphs with no source for the story, and it went completely viral on Facebook. In 2 days, that's one more day than one. In 2 days, it was shared 500,000 times on Facebook. Now, think about it when you post your little picture of your family gathering at Christmas. How many times that gets shared? None. 500,000 times in 48 hours. It scared the crap out of Europe, and it should have. But the story was entirely false. And here's another quote. This is from Snopes.com. Snopes, Snopes.com. And this is a quote. "Neither the European Union nor any individual member country thereof has enacted regulations requiring that as of May 2014, quote, newborn children will be compelled to take in a subcutaneous RFID chip, end quote, nor has any legitimate news outlet reported on such a story." But unfortunately, this story then, after Facebook, it gets picked up by alternative websites left and right. Dr. Leonard Caldwell's site, World Truth TV, Illuminati News, and Rents.com. People read these websites. People click on it. And I remember 20 years ago, 1995, 1994, 1995, I used to go to Rents.com. I used to go there for my news because I felt like, and it was a different website then than it is now. But I would go there for I would go there because I knew that they would be. I would go there and find just information that I wouldn't find anywhere else. And some of it was sensationalistic and some of it was nearly unbelievable, but it was a different news source. But you can't take everything literal. But when it goes out like this and it spreads like it does on Facebook, and then everybody picks it up, and the next thing you know, this joke of a story starts to read as true. And I'm telling you, it scared the crap out of Europe. And I don't get it. And before anybody or before any news gets out on jimmychurchradio.com, we vet it. And before I speak about it, I vet it. I don't want to be some disinformation guy. I would have hated to have reported on this story and then later to come out to find out later that it was completely false. I don't want to be part of that. I don't. And for worldtruth.tv and Illuminati News and Rents.com, for the before it's news, these websites, when you make a choice as an editor and you edit one of these sites, do you honestly admit to yourself that you know this is not true? It can't be true. You can't vet it. You can't get any sources on it, but you're just going to put it out anyway for clicks? For clicks? I just don't get it. There are no clicks that important to me or Dark Matter or jimmychurchradio.com that one of my producers just texted me in here to the studio. Snopes.com says it's a hoax. Yes, that's exactly right. Go to Snopes.com and check it out for yourself. Anyway, I had to get that off my chest. I cannot believe that clicks are that important to somebody, where money is more important. You know, we talked about that with Dr. Greer. Tomorrow night, we're going to have Philip Mantle on live from England. And we're going to be talking about a couple of UFO events that were done for money too, as well. And it's just awful, just awful how it just ruins it for everybody. But I just don't get the clicks for money. I just don't understand it. This is jimmychurchradio.com. Now listen, tonight was Dr. Greer. Tomorrow night, Philip Mantle. Friday is Leslie Keene, and I'm just excited for this week in radio. It's a pleasure to do everything for you and to speak here every single night. It is an honor. I do have to thank Keith Rowland for everything that he has done for us, and